Folks, I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is a regularly scheduled Greer City Council meeting called and convened this evening, June the 12th, 2018. Having called the meeting to order, I'd like to ask if you would please to stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance, and that'll be followed by an invocation for council by Councilman Lee Dumas.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this night that you've given us. Thank you for this great city that you've allowed us to lead. Lord, lead, guide, and direct us tonight, and help us to do your will always. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
The first of each meeting, we set aside a time for public forum. This is an opportunity for citizens to speak to council about items that are relevant to our agenda that evening. Ms. Duncan, anyone to appear in public forum this evening?
No, sir.
With that then, council, will move to the minutes from our council meeting held May the 22nd, 2018. Entertain a motion that they be received. So moved. Second. Any items of note for the clerk this evening? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowwood?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Ms. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Mayor Danner?
Yes. I'll ask our administrator if he would join us this evening. We have a special presentation to make. And I'm going to ask Carol Reynolds, please, to join us here in the front. From time to time, we have the opportunity to congratulate people that reach a milestone right here. Join us up front. And their employment with the city, but tonight we have got a special occasion, and that is that Ms. Reynolds is retiring from employment with the city of Greer after 14 years. And this certificate of appreciation says, congratulations upon your retirement from the city of Greer, presented in appreciation of 14 years of dedicated service to the city of Greer, July 1st, 2004 through June 15th, 2018, presented to Carol Reynolds. And we want to present you with this certificate of appreciation, and I believe the administrator has a gift for you as well, too.
We want to present on behalf of Mayor and Council and all the employees here at the city, this clock, retirement clock for you, as a small memento and remembrance of your time with us. And while you've been with us for 14 years, you've been in this business for much, much longer. I think you told me the other night, 17 years, but 31 total years. And so you have served us ably and wonderfully, and you've been a great friend to the city. You will be sorely missed by all of Team Greer. And we just wanted to have this opportunity to say thank you for your time with us, but congratulations on a well-deserved retirement.
And as I just mentioned, we do recognize those employees that have reached milestones in terms of their employment with the city, and so tonight we're going to take that opportunity. This is a resolution recognizing and commending the City of Greer employees. It says, whereas the City of Greer endeavors to recognize and reward its dedicated and faithful employees, and whereas Catherine Gordon has served in the Building and Development Standard Department for 5 years, Shauna Markley has served in the Police Department for 5 years. Megan Weibel has served in the Police Department for 5 years. James Compton has served in the Police Department for 10 years. Jim Ridgeville has served in administration for 10 years. Roman Wilson has served in the Police Department for 10 years. Terry Leibovitz has served in the Public Services Department for 15 years. Steve Anderson has served in the police department for 20 years. Paul Brown has served in the fire department for 20 years, and Matt Hendy has served in the police department for 25 years. These employees have served in a distinguished and professional manner now. Be it therefore resolved that the City Council of the City of Greer, South Carolina, in a meeting duly assembled, wishes to officially recognize and commend these employees for their dedicated services and distinguished service which they have performed. Be it further resolved, the City of Greer hereby rewards these dedicated employees with a certificate of appreciation and an administrative day off with pay approved this 12th day of June 2018. As we read your name, if you would, please join us in the front and stay with us for a moment so that we can recognize you. Catherine Gordon. James Stockton. Thank you for your service. I appreciate it. Jim Ridgehill. Jim, thank you. Appreciate it. Roman Wilson. Roman wasn't able to join us, apparently. Terry Leibowitz. Terry doesn't get to spend much time in this building. He was looking for the water fountain just a little while ago. Thank you, Terry. Stay with us up front here just a second. Paul Brown. And Matt Handy, Chief Matt Handy. Join me in giving these folks a round of applause. With that, we're going to move to tonight's presentation. Penny Ellis, who is our crime analysis, will present an overview of the police department's use of data to solve crimes and direct resources to prevent crimes. And so, Matt, do you want to do official introduction and give us a little insight into how we're using the data that we collect to help keep our city safe and operating in a smooth fashion?
Absolutely. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We appreciate the opportunity tonight to highlight one outstanding member of our staff at the police department. Just to give you sort of a foundation before she comes up, as you're well aware, we strongly believe in the philosophy of community policing and problem-oriented policing. A crucial element for that to be successful is the accurate and timely analysis of data. If we use that data that we have to mine through to appropriately send our resources out to address problems in our community that are creating crime problems. So we have a lot of data that we have to deal with. Data comes from many sources, whether it be police reports, collision reports, information from officers. So we actually are bringing in information and intelligence the officers are getting as they talk to members of the community. We get information from our community meetings, neighborhood meetings, lots of places we get data. Our dispatch calls for service analysis, we do a lot of different analysis. So the person that's behind all of that is Penny Ellis, who's an extremely capable person with lots of experience and education in her field. And I promise you, we have probably the best analyst in the upstate, if not in the state. So I'll turn that over to Penny, and she's going to give you a very brief snapshot of what she does in her job. And when she gets finished, I just hope you remember she does a whole lot more than what she's going to have time to share with you tonight. So, Penny.
Good evening. As he said, I'm Penny Ellis. I'm the Crime and Intelligence Analyst for the city. I'm going to go over just a little bit of what we do at the police department as we pull in this data and we provide it to the officers and to the community. To give you an overview of what I do, as I thought about what I was going to talk about with you guys today, I realized that what I do is the 5 W's that we learn in school. It's the who, what, when, where, and why, and sometimes the how. We need to know what is going on in the community, where it's happening, when it's happening, and eventually we get to the who by identifying our prolific offenders and our gang members, and then we get to the how of how we're going to work with patrol and with the community to combat these issues and hopefully resolve the issues for the community.
Ms. Ellis, would you pull the microphone down just a little bit so we can record all this? That'd be great. Thank you.
I'm slightly vertically challenged as a friend. When we get to the how part, where we decide what are we going to do to resolve this issue for our community, we might develop a project if it's warranted, or we might just say this time, this place, we need to be there extra patrolling and saturating the area. But ultimately, no project that we do is done on a singular level. In fact, our mission that we go over in every CompStat is to provide quality services in partnership with the community to ensure safe and secure neighborhoods. The following example is one that we did last week. It was a pretty big project that just kind of hit the ground running very, very quickly. We worked with Patrol, CID, Community Outreach, K-9, Vice, the Housing Authority, and with Farmer County Sheriff's Office. To give you a little bit of background on the problem, 2018 so far has shown a progression of nearly 34% increase in firearm discharges. Sometimes this is fireworks, so it's not a super alarming thing, because a lot of times the fireworks can sound like that, and we get nervous, we call it in, and it's great. We need the community to call that in. But it is a big increase. So 27% of these calls for service were within half-a-mile radius of a community just south of downtown Greer. I've got a map that I was going to show you guys just real quick. This is our patrol areas. These are how we direct our patrols. I have to turn this off for just a second. This was our firearm discharges over 2018. You can see very distinctly that it is in one area. These are a hotspot map that shows where the highest density is. This density is over one community. Let's see if I can remember what he told me to do. Shift. Calls for service in this area and then the community input, we put that together and we can identify the problem. We put that with the map and it gives us the proof behind our data-driven policing and gives us the proof that we need to pursue our project. I've already went over, we've seen where the highest density is, and we've gathered this through the calls for service. Now we're going to conduct surveillance. We went out there, extra patrolled the area, we talked to the community. We're starting to get a little bit of pushback from the community because of the issues that they were seeing. So we kind of stepped it back a little bit, and we just went the surveillance route. I conducted this surveillance over a 2-day time period with the help of CID and patrol. The subject was observed that morning. A subject that we had identified living in that area was observed driving a vehicle which he was prohibited from driving. We've known this subject for quite a while. He has violent tendencies. He is often carrying a firearm. We have arrested him just previously for a violent offense. We got with Farmer County, found that he was on an ankle monitor for this prior assault. So we started to watch the firearm discharges, the GPS monitoring, and the surveillance. Spartanburg County decided to violate his bond based on this GPS because he was not allowed to leave the house, and he was prohibited from driving in the first place. CID K-9 and Vice searched the home based on the probable cause that was obtained by my surveillance, and the subject was arrested. Patrick Prince Jr. was arrested last week. He was DUS 3rd is what we found him on through the surveillance, and he was trafficking methamphetamine while we were watching the surveillance. To give you a little bit of background on this, in 2015, we were having home invasions, burglaries, firearm discharges, robberies, all within about a 3 to 4 month time frame within our community. We started to target in on the people that the community were saying, this is what's happening to me, this is who did it. We arrested several people involved, and our violent crimes dropped by 88% immediately. We have always just tried to keep tabs, make sure probation, GPS, anything like that that we can do to make sure that these violent offenses aren't continuing. Since the date of this arrest, we've had 0 calls for service at this community. This community was seeing assaults, disturbances, and firearm discharges on a daily basis, and now they're gone. Through the data-driven policing and the work of everybody within the police department, Spartanburg County, and the Housing Authority, so far, we've been able to cease the issue. We will continue to work in such a manner to create these projects and solve these issues. That's pretty much all I have. Do you guys have any questions?
Well, you and the chief will hang around for just a second. Council, any questions or comments?
You said you started to get some pushback from that area
Yes, sir.
because of what you were doing?
No, it wasn't because of what we were doing. Patrol regularly extra patrols this community. They walk through the community. It's Drummond Village, so they have an open air area where people play ball, they talk, they have cookouts and stuff like that. Patrol goes out there pretty regularly to communicate with the kids and talk to the families, and they've never had issues. Suddenly, when we realized that he was living out here, they started to not talk to us. They started to shut down. They started to tell their kids not to talk to us. We noticed that when we would get out there, he would make a phone call to that person asking, why are you talking to the police? It was kind of an oppression in that community.
Others?
May I ask, Penny, if you could share, or Chief Hamby as well, often, intuitively, we know where problems are. Why is it important for us to drill the data to get that substantiation for that?
That is true in many senses. Our officers are aware because they're where they're supposed to be. They spend a lot of hours of their life in these areas of the city, so they do have a very good feel of the pulse of their area that they're assigned. We have to pull out a lot of resources and go after the problem areas, and when we do that, we are somewhat involving that neighborhood for a temporary period of time. They're going to see the police out there, and if they ever need to question what's going on, we have the data to prove what's going on. So it helps us justify a lot of our resource use, and we can actually show some success stories that we've had in individual communities. When we go to a lot of these community meetings, and we'll update them on what has occurred over the last few months or few years or year, when we show them what the situation was before with our data analysis, explain what actions we took, and then we show another analysis after the action was taken, that is there, it's written proof. So we have a really good product to show the neighborhood afterwards, and we couldn't do that unless we had the data. Hopefully that answered that.
And the data doesn't lie. And
Data doesn't lie.
The data doesn't
Yeah.
lie in any circumstance.
Very true.
It is what it is.
Yes.
And our experience has been as well that, that at some point in these cases, there is a defense opportunity, and we want to make sure that there are no accusations of profiling, that type of concern that we could have, and that accusation can be made if it's intuitive. But with data-driven information, we're able to demonstrate why we are where we are and what we're doing there. It's an extremely valuable tool to us, not only in solving issues in communities, but it's also enabling us to get better convictions once we go to court with these cases as well.
Absolutely. And another timely comment that just came to my mind, I didn't plan on saying this, but as we're talking through budget, I do believe that the accurate data analysis allows us to be smarter with our resources. So we're not just having a quote-unquote shotgun approach to policing. We're not just sending officers randomly out looking for something. They are directed to where the data is showing us the crime is occurring, in addition to the intelligence that each officer has as they patrol their areas as well.
I think that's good to know, because to Mr. Rivers' point and to yours both, we've now seen a data-driven presentation by the fire department and the police department. And I think one of the things that we can take away, there's several things that we can take away from these presentations, but a couple of them occur to me, and that is, number one, the way policing and our fire service has drastically changed over the last couple of decades, in the way that we do it and apply it and how we administer it. It's a whole new ballgame for both fire service and policing in terms of how we address what it is we do on a daily basis, and the data is driving a lot of how we manage both departments. And to that point, I think you made a good point. As we learned from the call volume of the fire department, and looking at that literally mapped out in sort of the hot spots that we looked at just a minute ago in terms of the crime, it's interesting to see where those areas are that we frequently are in the most, and that sort of thing, so that we can focus our proactive efforts in those areas as well. But the other thing that it does do, and to your point just a minute ago, is it helps us allocate resources and make more informed decisions. And I think that's important for our citizens to know as well, too. One of the things that we've known for years that we were going to have to do is add substations. And I think the data that we are seeing in terms of how those might be best positioned is going to cause us ultimately to rethink how we do that. And so I think this is we've applied this same sort of thinking to our budget process. We're seeing it in use now with fire and police, and I'm sure the other departments are using it as well too. I think it's a valuable piece of what we're doing, and I'm glad that we're recognizing that, because I think it's something that our citizens need to know that we're doing, because it is it's creating a higher quality of life, and it's saving us money as well too. So thank you. Anyone else?
I have one question. Let's say this gentleman gets released at some point. I mean, is there any type of follow-up or monitoring after he returns to the community, and, like you said, those lines of communication start to shut down again? Is there any type of follow-up or tracking or anything like that happens, with him?
When they get released, depending on if he's done completely with his time or if it's probation or parole, me personally, once he gets out, I try to maintain that date, especially if it's probation, and maintain contact with his probation officer. If it's probation or parole, where there is an ankle monitor, we cannot actively view that, but should we need it, we can ask for it. And we try to maintain that intelligence database so that we know this was his last incident. Hopefully he's clean, hopefully he's done. We'll just keep it right there until we see something new. And then the community will usually tell us something different before we actually ever get out with them. And that's kind of that key thing of being proactive. If they tell us he's out and he's causing an issue, then we can step up before we really need to make an arrest.
How quickly, you talked about tracking the data. How often are you looking for trends like this that we need to address?
I do it every day. We have a calls for service database, and we have our incident report database. We don't have an automated database, so we really have to manually dig in and read it and follow up with it every day.
And when you see a trend that's going in the wrong direction, you just talk to the chief about it, and it just kind of trickles down from there?
I usually go straight to the area sergeant. Wherever something has happened, if it's auto braking or auto theft or just some nuisance activity, I go straight to that area sergeant and say, this is starting to creep up, this might be something we need to look at. And usually they will start extra patrolling the area and gathering information by talking to people in that area.
Sounds good.
That's very cool.
That's why it's good to have relationship with the police department and the community, that they are willing to talk to you. And Greer's always had a good relationship with people in the community, because they don't mind coming forward. And, I've even talked to people who knew they were doing stuff they had no business doing, but I won't call the officers by name, but they knew that he was fair but firm, is what I'd always get from him. And, even though they knew they were doing things they didn't have no business doing, they had a lot of respect for him in the way that he treated them, even when he had to do, what he had to do. So I think that speaks volumes about our police department.
Appreciate that. We expect a lot out of our personnel to get out of the police car and talk to people, building that trust to get that information that you're talking about. They're not going to come talk to us if it's not someone that they know or trust. It's kind of hard to get them to trust you if they don't know you and have that comfort level, at least enough for them to come forward to us and share information. Because some of these communities, if they're going to talk to the police and give us information, they might feel uncomfortable amongst the neighbors that they're living in. There is some pressure in certain areas for them not to talk to the police. So we have to overcome that by getting out of our car and getting to know the neighbors.
Thank y'all. We appreciate the report. With that, we will move to the administrator's report. Mr. Driggers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Just a couple of calendar items as reminders for us. 1 week from tonight, our Chamber of Commerce is sponsoring their annual Public Safety Recognition Program, where we'll be honoring and recognizing the men and women of both our fire department and our police department, also our area folks with medical services, ambulance services, and those types of folks. That is taking place again next Tuesday down at the Cannon Center. It's at 7 p.m. We do have space reserved for you, and so if you could let us know of your attendance plans, we certainly hope that you can join us as the community recognizes these fine folks next week. Our Moonlight movie series has started. Thursday evenings, you will see large crowds here in the downtown area. Last week, we had about 800 people in the amphitheater and in the park for our movie last week, and typically it grows from there. So we're expecting large crowds as we work through that program this summer. Also on Friday evenings in June and July, in our partnership with Greer Cultural Arts, we have our Tunes in the Park series, and that will be on Friday evenings here at City Park. And of course, we had a wonderful opportunity to do a press conference this week announcing the 10th Freedom Blast event. It is going to be a wonderful, wonderful event here at City Park on Saturday, June 30th. It is from 6 until 10. You want to come at the beginning of that festival because the very beginning of it, the start of it, are skydivers dropping into the park. That is, if you've never seen one of those skydive events where they will land on a target the size of of about 1 yard. It is pretty phenomenal, and they'll be landing right here in City Park. Of course, we'll have music through the evening, there's food, entertainment, and what we certainly bill as one of the absolute greatest fireworks shows in the upstate. And that'll all be taking place on Saturday, June 30th for our 10th Freedom Blast celebration. Just as a reminder, accommodations have been made for the Municipal Association of South Carolina's annual summer meeting. That'll be taking place in mid-July. If you have any questions concerning that, we have all of those arrangements now confirmed. And last but not least, unfortunately, I do want to make you all aware that earlier today we did receive notice that one of our team members, Skipper Burns, our department head over in our Public Services Department, his father passed away earlier today. Skipper was scheduled to be with us this evening for the budget presentation, and he was worried about that. He gave me I called and talked with him as soon as we got the news about his father. We assured him that we all understand, and that his highest priority today is to be with his family. But please do remember Skipper and his family as they experience the loss of their father, grandfather, as well. So I wanted to pass that information along to you. Certainly available if you have any questions. You'll be hearing a lot from me a little bit later in the agenda as we have the opportunity to present for first reading of your budget. Department heads are with us this evening as well, or representatives of those departments, and they'll be with you through that process as well. Any questions? I'm glad to try to answer those.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Council, let's move to appointments of boards and commissions. The first of which is in front of us this evening is the Greenville-Spartanburg International Airport Environs Planning Commission. Mr. Miles Nason is the Spartanburg County representative. His term will expire in 6/30/2018. Any information in that regard?
Yes, sir. We have communicated with Mr. Nason, and if council so chooses and would desire, he would be willing to continue to serve, but certainly recognize that that is council's decision. Has been active with that group since he was first appointed back in 2013, and again, is willing to serve if that's council's desire.
Council, you've heard the recommendation from administration in regards to Mr. Nason's service. If anyone wishes to nominate him for another term, the floor is open.
I'll nominate.
I have a motion
And a second.
and a second. Motion and a second. Any discussion in that regard? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council Board of Architectural Review has 2 terms that expire at the end of June. Joanna Hyatt's term will expire 6/30/2018, as will Brandon Price's. Ms. McCormick, do you have any information in regards to the service of Ms. Hyatt or Mr. Price?
Yes, sir. They are both willing to serve again and would like to make that known to the council.
I'll entertain a motion then to do these individually in regards to Ms. Hyatt's service, recommendation that she's willing to serve again. Do I hear a motion to receive?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion in that regard? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, Brandon Price has affirmed that he is willing to serve another term on the Board of Architectural Review. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion in that regard? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, in regards to the Board of Zoning Appeals, we have a number of districts that have representatives whose term will expire at the end of this month. District 2, Glendora Massey. District 4, Robbie Septon. District 5, Lisa Lynn. And at-large, Monica Reagan. I will ask first if any of those district representatives or at-large has contacted or has any information in regards to the service of their representative. Have you had any discussion with any of those folks?
Yes, sir, we have spoken with all 4 representatives, and they are all willing to serve again at the pleasure of council.
All right. In regards to District 2, I want to let you make that recommendation if you choose to do so, sir.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion in regards to Ms. Massey's continued service? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes?
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. District 4?
Second?
Have a motion and a second. Anyone like to add anything to that discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes?
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. District 5?
Nominate Lisa Lee.
Do I hear a second?
Second?
Any discussion in that regard? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes?
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Based on the recommendation of staff, does someone make a motion to renominate Monica Reagan?
So moved.
Second?
And I have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes?
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes.
Who's the chairman of that board?
Currently, it is Allison Ringer.
Council will move to items of old business, the first of which is the second and final reading of ordinance number 3-2018. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of property owned by Jones Avenue Partners LLC located at Jones Avenue by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of DRD for said property. Ms. McCormick, any additional or new updated information that we may need in regards to ordinance number 3-2018?
Thank you. No, sir, I have no new information to report.
Hearing that, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion in regards to ordinance 3-2018? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes?
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, we have the second and final reading of ordinance number 15-2018. This is an ordinance authorizing the conveyance of certain real property in the city of Greer. Any new or additional information in that regard, Mr. Riggers?
No new information.
I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion and a second in that regard. Any questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes?
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, the last item of old business is an ordinance is second and final reading of ordinance number 16-2018. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of property owned by Beth Bannon located at 9 Mill Road by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of DRD for said property. Any new or additional information in that regard, Ms. McCormick?
Mayor Danner, simply that due to staff review and recommendation, a fire turnaround was added at the end of that street rather than just being a straight street pulling in and backing out. They have added a T turnaround at the end of the street.
Thank you. With that additional information, do I hear a motion to receive?
So moved. Second.
Motion, the floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, let's move to items of new business this evening, the first of which is our ACE Environmental contract. This is a request for authorization for the city administrator to execute a contract for services with ACE Environmental. Mr. Driggers, we have at this point, information that you may want to provide us in regards to that contract.
Mayor and Council, as you are aware, because we've been working through this for quite some time, over the past year, we have been renegotiating our contract of services for residential municipal solid waste pickup, as well as recycling program, the pickup of our debris material as well. We have attempted to keep you informed through that process as that contract has continued to be negotiated. Since we last discussed this contract in executive session, I did want to make you aware that the one item that we did indeed remove from the contract was a surcharge for fuel, either as a surcharge or a refund based on price. We had great difficulty in agreeing on what that rack price should be, and it was apparent to both sides that this was continuing to be a stumbling block for us, and through that negotiation, both myself and the principal of ACE Environmental agreed to remove that in its entirety. That there is risk, certainly on the contractor's part, relative to the cost of fuel. And of course, my consideration was that it was less risk for us to consider that fuel was going to drop below what was set as the floor on that even previously. So again, we removed that in its entirety. The bottom line to the financial impact of the contract is that it does provide for a ramp up over a 5-year period, 50 cents per month increase in that. Even when it reaches its highest over that 5-year period, the comparison rate to market data for private services is that at today's cost for that service, at the 5-year point, we will still be below what is today's market rate for that. So there certainly is economy of scale for us being able to provide the service over 10,000 households citywide and providing that service. So the details of that contract we've reviewed previously in executive session. I do bring that to you as a recommendation for us to enter into that contract. Do note that the contract is effective July 1, 2017. The contract was expiring, and it has taken us the past year to come to terms on what that new contract would consist of. But I certainly do believe that it is in the best interest of the city to continue that contractual relationship, and I do believe that it is a very fair and equitable price that we have negotiated going forward with those increases over that 5-year period.
Council having been provided information by the administrator, and as you are aware, many updates over the course of the last number of months as he and the folks from ACE have worked to craft a mutually beneficial contract for both of us, and we have now reached that point, and on the recommendation of the administrator, I'll entertain a motion that we receive the ACE Environmental contract for garbage collection and other services. So moved. Have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Floor is open for discussion.
Mr. Greer's, in this contract, it may be a holdover from past contracts. Article 19 says Greer may institute a program whereby residents will be required to use paper bags procured at the resident's cost. Do we have any plans?
We do not.
That you're aware of?
It is carryover. We leave that there because there could be a mandate to us either through DHEC or through the county that is receiving that at their centers. And so while they have not notified us or advising us that could still come forward, we know that there is that possibility. For us, it's only there as a trigger if we are required by DHEC or the county landfill to do that.
But that would be our decision, not ACE's, right?
That is correct. That is our decision.
Others? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
No.
Ms. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Mayor Danner?
Yes. Council, the next item of new business this evening is the first reading of ordinance number 18-2018. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of property owned by professional offices located at 106 West Church Street from OD office to R12. This ordinance is a rezoning request for the parcel located on 106 West Church Street. Mr. McMahon, do you want to give us an overview of that, please, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Ordinance 18-2018 is a rezoning for a parcel located at 106 West Church Street. The owner is requesting to rezone the property from OD Office District to R12 Single Family Residential. The purpose is to rezone the property to be used as a single family residence. Planning Commission held a meeting on May 21st and recommended approval for this request. This here is just the aerial of the vicinity. It's got OD next to it, showing the zoning. You got R12 here. This is the street view of the property, and that is all that I have at this time, Mayor.
Council, with the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission, do I hear a motion to accept first reading of ordinance number 18-2018?
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood?
Yes.
Ms. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Bettis?
Yes.
Mayor Danner?
Yes. Item C on the agenda tonight is the first reading of ordinance number 19-2018. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of the property owned by Southside Baptist Church located on Main Street from R12 Single Family to C2 Commercial. This ordinance is a rezoning request for 3 parcels located along Main Street. Mr. McMahon?
Thank you, Mayor. Ordinance 19-2018 is a rezoning request for 3 parcels located on Main Street. This is directly across from Southside Baptist Church. The property is currently zoned R12. They're requesting C2 Commercial. Planning Commission held a meeting on May 21st and recommended approval of this request. This here is the aerial of the 3 parcels.
It's a parking lot?
It's the vacant lot that's directly across the street. Yes, sir. There is the street view. That's all that I have at this time for this ordinance, Mayor.
I entertain a motion to receive ordinance number 19-2018.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Floor is open for discussion.
Those 3 lots, that's shown like that. That's all vacant, right? It didn't include that one home.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And there are other commercial properties on that road. I believe there's an accounting office right past those.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And on below there's, on the right is more commercial.
As an example, Mr. McMahon, what would be an appropriate use for C2?
C2 is basically kind of what we have going along Buncombe, up and down Poinsett, we have C2. The closer you get to 29, we do C3 there. So it's kind of a less intense, it's a little more intense than what C1 would allow, but nowhere near as intense as what C3 along 29 would allow.
Would C2 allow for a business that had unusually long hours? I mean, a late night type of use of some kind?
It could potentially be a restaurant, could be retail space, could be office space.
Okay. And in terms of a daytime use, potentially maybe a tire store or muffler shop or something in that regard?
For that to happen, they would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special exception. We allow for auto repair in C2, but it has to be done by special exception.
Thank you. Others?
And it's
It's directly across the street from the church, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions? Comments? Discussion? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Boopert,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, item D this evening is the first reading of ordinance number 20-2018. Ordinance number 20-2018 is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of a portion of property owned by William and Marshall Johnson located at 1689 Gibbs Shoals Road and Ellen Sudeth Nichols located at 122 Nichols Drive by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of DRD for said property. Ordinance number 20-2018 is an annexation and zoning request for property located on Gibbs Shoals Road in Greenville County. Ms. McCormick, we're glad you have joined us for a discussion of ordinance number 20-2018.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. The parcels for annexation are 10.61 acres located on Gibbs Shoals Road. It is proposed for residential development with a design review district zoning. The development will contain potentially 40 single-family residences, and the Planning Commission will conduct a public hearing on June 18th, 2018 to review the zoning of this parcel. Just orient you to the area. This is a portion of this parcel which we've cut out. There's a remainder that does front Nichols Drive, and we pulled this up straight on GIS, so that it does not include the home located on Nichols, but the portion behind it of that parcel, and then a portion of this parcel located here. This is our street view. And as this is a request for DRD, Design Review District, they are required to submit a plan showing the layout of the community. I would like to bring your attention to another slide, however. As you are all aware, ordinance 2021 and 22 are all very close in area. As such, I felt it necessary to overlay those on one map so you can see how they fit, how they relate as you think about this and do your decision making. Ordinance 20 is for this property in question here. And two changes that we have made this week since this was sent out to you. They would like, and these would be ordinance amendments, they would like to make a connection between the community and ordinance 21 in this area. That would be a vehicular connection. They would also like to show a proposed fire access connection and pedestrian connection between the property for annexation in ordinance 20 and ordinance 22. Those owners and engineers have worked diligently this week to create a plan to make this a more connected community and would like to ask for those changes to be made to this ordinance. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. That's all I have at this time, Mr. Mayor.
These are separate developers. These are separate projects.
Right. This is the
They're
first project.
in proximity together, but separate developments.
Right. This is the second, same developer for these two, but another DRD. And then this project is the ordinance 22. So simply for this case, it is this one shown on the screen now. Thank you for that point of clarification.
So for the purpose of discussion, ordinance number 20-2018 is before us this evening, Council. I'll entertain a motion to receive ordinance number 20-2018.
So moved. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion.
Show me again where, I can't, it's hard for me to see the screen I'm watching up here, so can you show me where go back to the other slide and the connectivity?
Sure. Okay. So this is ordinance 20. This portion here, 40 single-family residential units. On our next ordinance, they're asking for proposal of a townhouse development here, which I'll tell you more about, with a full pedestrian and vehicular connection between these two developments. This is the same developer and the same owner. And this property is for ordinance number 22, and they're asking for a fire connection in this location, but a full pedestrian connection.
it calls for a portion of the property. Obviously, are they already in the process of resurveying that to carve that out? But we can't annex a portion of property without it being an independent, separate tax map number.
Right, they are in process of, they have surveyed it, they just haven't recorded those surveys. A boundary survey will be required before second reading.
Very good.
We have those in exhibit form at this point.
It's good to see that we've had some cooperation in terms of zoning where we have, or at least planning, and where we have had multiple developers to take a much broader view. Is this at your behest, or at least our staff, to recommend that some of these changes be made, or have these folks been working hand in hand all along?
Mayor Danner, staff had obviously discussions about the magnitude and scale of this development, and it is pretty much a regional impact, and as such, we felt the need to bring those developers together and the owners to the table in order to discuss some alternatives to what we have seen as initial proposals. And at this point, the developers and owners, who are both and all present this evening, have proposed this plan for you. We did work with them this week diligently on that.
Mayor, if I may, Ms. McCormick may be in a bit modest. Let me add that what happens in this process when developers or property owners approach us with a desire to develop and or to annex their property into the city of Greer for the purpose of development, one of the things that we as staff do in that process is we bring in all of our departments and we talk about the impact of a development. And so the police department's going to review what is the impact to patrol and to their services. Fire's going to do the same thing. Recreation is going to review what the impact is to our parks and facilities and our programming. And all of us are going to provide our input to what we believe the impact of that could be. And again, that's on city services. We're reviewing the impact on municipal services for this project. In all projects that will come before us. To Ms. McCormick's credit, what she was able to convey to property owners and to developers is that there is a great desire for us, because in our strategic plan, we talk about connectivity between neighborhoods. We talk about how we are able to move people within the community where they're not always having to access to outside roads. We're going to review open space in those communities, and so if we're looking at cluster development or we're looking at DRD, and because in a DRD there are trade-offs, and that gives us much more flexibility so that we can ask of that project, or we can communicate to the project certain things that we would expect before we would approve in a DRD environment. So it allows us to be much more involved in the process of how the final product looks and feels and functions. And Ms. McCormick, through her planning background and her expertise in this area, has really been able to work with our development community in being able to say, have you thought about, have you considered, we would like to see, and has been very effective in doing that in these projects, not only these that you're seeing this evening, but all of our projects that have been developed. And so she answered your question way too modestly. Yes, we strive to make sure we are influencing that process.
Thank you.
Valid points that I appreciate, and thank you for your work on this. Council is, as Ms. McCormick's already mentioned, we're going to be considering several annexation ordinances in regards to what, for all intents and purposes, appears, at least in some of these schematics, is a large, almost single endeavor, although there are a number of moving parts and pieces in here. One of the things that particularly encourages me is as I mentioned before, is this idea that they have worked hand in hand here in terms of creating the ingress and egress that a development of this size warrants and needs, and where it feeds out, and particularly in regards to the roads that service that area out there. I realize that there are a number of you in the audience tonight that may not have taken advantage of a public forum to voice your concerns about a project like this or a project of this size, but I do appreciate you being here this evening. I would say to you that this is a beautiful piece of property that has been empty for many years, and we're sensitive to the fact that this is changing. But we also have been preparing for this for at least the last 15 years, as this council has been discussing the fact that the best way for us to influence and even ultimately control growth and development is through annexation. It gives us the ability through a various number of means to be able to craft projects that are reviewed and are held in regards to appropriate forms of development, which is changing rapidly. We have been for many years, as well as most of the United States has been, in a mode of development of single-family homes on large tracts. And for those of you that are in the development business and in the business of selling homes, you know that while there is still a market in that regard, there is also a thriving market for other alternative forms of housing. And mixed-use housing and single developments like this is attractive because it brings a lot of different people together, and that eases a lot of considerations in regards to impact to schools and social services and highways, roads, and a number of different things. The other thing that it does is ensures that the development that occurs on that area has oversight, which that it may not if it were located simply in the city. And so as we continue to grow and move forward, I think you're going to see more and more of these types of developments, because I think it's appropriate that we do it and give those folks that have the ability to offer their land for these types of developments to do that as well too. And for us, it's all about infill. One of the ways that we keep taxes low and have not had to raise them is our practice of infill development. We understood many years ago that we were never going to be able to keep up with sprawl if we just continued to grow like we were for a number of years, and so our focus has been inward ever since. And we have now realized that the limits of our outer growth have pretty well been reached, and these are the types of projects that we are looking for to infill and backfill those areas as we work our way back towards the center of town. As I mentioned earlier, this gives us the ability to better determine where services are going to be needed in the future in terms of fire and police and ambulance and recreation and a lot of other things, and helps us from a budgeting process as well as a service project. And so to those that are working on this project, I realize it's not shall we say carved in stone yet, but I do applaud the efforts that have gone into working on this project, both from staff level and the development level, as we have put together a plan that seems appropriate for this piece of property. Tonight's action is simply the first step in annexation of the property. And that is what is before this council this evening. So I will open the floor back up for any other comments or discussion in regards to ordinance number 20-2018.
I think you said it.
Ordinance itself, we didn't address, and I don't know if we have to, the other saying about the connectivity now, that has changed, or that's a change. Do we need it, or is that just going to be part of the second reading? We don't need to address that tonight, correct?
You're doing it as DRD. And
Correct, it's DRD. Those full change documents will be presented to Planning Commission on Monday, so they can make amendments to that document and bring it back with those changes before you at second
So it's
reading.
3 separate DRDs?
Yes, sir.
What is the total number of units for all 3?
Before the changes that we received early this evening, it was 568 units. Now, on the third project, ordinance 22, we have a few changes, so we have a reduction in density there. I need to recalculate, but it's in the 500 range, over 500.
Did they have to do a traffic study, or?
Traffic studies are underway on all 3 of these projects, yes, sir. And the developers are here if you'd like to hear anything from them at this point.
As a reminder for us, first reading, and the purpose of first reading prior to the Planning Commission's meeting is that if you were to not approve an annexation petition on first reading, it's dead. And so we would remove it from the remainder of the process. And so it allows for the Planning Commission to know whether or not you're not committing that you approve it, because that's your second reading review. First reading simply says that you're willing to pass that on to the Planning Commission for them to review, hold that public hearing, and provide feedback back to you for your consideration at second reading. And then, of course, under that DRD, that has to be approved by both the Planning Commission and ultimately by council.
Speaking of which, what's the zoning on the property now?
It's currently zoned RS in Greenville County.
This is such a large project that's really going to change the complexion of this area. It's been relatively rural for a good while, and I think about the impact of all the homes that are going to move in there. I know we've talked about this before, about requirements for developers to have green space and different things like that inside of these projects. I mean, is there any type of consideration as far as that's concerned?
Yes, sir. We have worked with the developers, as Mr. Trigger said this week, to talk about green space, talk about amenity areas. You'll see in the third project they have really ramped up those amenity areas based upon that recommendation and discussion with staff. We've also been in communication this week with the developers regarding improvements to possibly working with Greenville County Schools at the elementary school across the street to perhaps, obviously force them to donate a playground to the school, but to help improve those facilities and maybe have an arrangement where the school leaves that playground open at night or in the evening hours before dark to have an extra facility. Riverside Middle School is very close. That track is widely used in the evening when baseball practices and the like are going on. There are, while not publicly owned, there are public facilities that are close by for this. However, we have been in discussion, and you will see in the next DRD, more open space than in this one and much more in the third.
Are they all planning to share all of those between all the communities?
That we do not know at this point. I believe that the first 2 projects, 20 and 21, may have some sharing arrangement as that is the same owner and the same builder. They're a little bit of a different style product from what we'll see single family and townhome, which may require separate amenities. But certainly within the third project, they should be sharing amenities.
You mentioned the schools. I know Woodland, their teacher to student ratio is climbing drastically. I know that I have several friends that teach there and friends that have kids that go there, and they're real concerned about the acceleration of growth in that area. What type of communication do we have with the school system, and how do they begin to kind of anticipate the impact of a project like this?
That's a great question. We have the school district at PAC, and last Thursday when we had this project before the PAC meeting, we did discuss that, and the school district always notes that while the school's right across the street, students may be assigned to other areas. We've actually seen that most recently on Brushy Creek Road with Echo Ridge. We would think those students would be Woodland, Riverside, but they're actually going to Greer schools because of that level of, I guess, teacher-student ratio. I did have a further discussion with Greenville County Schools last week in a private meeting about this concern, not about these developments specifically, but about the growth in the Greer area and what the trends are. Are we impacting them greatly? What kind of data do we need to be providing to the school district? How can we work hand in hand to make sure that our schools don't become overcrowded and seeing needs for portables, because that is nothing that anyone wants their children to be educated in. There is a new elementary school planned in the near future for the, I guess, west side of Greer, this area, as it is a growing area. However, what data is also telling us is that the family is changing, the family dynamic is changing. People are no longer having 4 children by the age of 30. People are waiting to have children until after 30. So they're not as concerned, it's not as immediately alarming to the school district on the planning level as it was in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s. As millennials age and wait to have children until a later date, the school planning system will change a little bit. And we're going to continue to have quarterly meetings set up now with the school district planner administration, and I need to have more discussions regarding when those meetings can be, how we need to function, who needs to participate in those meetings. But certainly working with our schools is of paramount importance.
I think one of the things we need to understand, Council, is that, you know, this project obviously is large. I guess it's as large as any we've considered. The other thing about it is we obviously need to take a proactive approach. We've heard from both fire and police that being proactive is beneficial. While this is a large number of homes, it is a small portion of what we have on the table at this point in time, which I guess as of a week, maybe 2 weeks ago, was 3,000 or better planned residents.
The Planning Commission agenda this month has 9 cases and there are over 1,000 units. This is half of those. We have others that are simply rezonings or subdivision reviews that will come before you at a later date in July.
So, you know, one of the things that we need to understand is that being proactive is one of the ways that we help manage this, but we also, while we want to make sure that our officials and other administrative people with school districts and the county and other organizations are all aware of this, there is some limit to what we can do other than to make them aware of what's taking place and how it's taking place. Let me ask this, first reading of ordinance number 20-2018, for those listed, are there owners of the property or representative of the owners of the property that are with us this evening? If so, would you raise your hand? Would any of you care to address council in regards to ordinance number 20-2018? If you would give us your name and address for matter of record, we'd appreciate it.
Sure, I'm Jonathan Ness, OSD Engineering. I'm actually the engineer on this project representing the developer. We're very excited about this potential project. Like you said, we've been working with Kelly on making some modifications to connect to this large development to our east. We also talked about adding a connection to our other development to the west with pedestrian and full access road. We're doing a traffic study, so we understand the potential impact on the development around us, but we feel like, you know, our project is broken up to where it's not overwhelming. We actually had, 2 entrances for both projects. You're going to see the next one here shortly. So we feel like it's not overkill for the area.
Thank you, sir. Any questions in that regard? Appreciate the information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Others?
Kelly, I have one quick question. I know this is not like Blue Ridge Plantation, but it reminds me of that to that scale. And I remember, I think we've adopted a lot of different practices with the way that we work with developers as far as phasing out projects. And how have things changed since that project started years ago as far as, because I think if I remember at the time, The commission made a huge investment in infrastructure and put everything into place, and I think a lot of that shifted more towards the developer now, and there's impact fees, and there's a lot of different things that have changed as far as our relationship with the developer as far as the planning goes.
Certainly. That's a great comparison of size, scale. While Blue Ridge Plantation was a significantly larger number of initially planned homes in that area, I would like to talk about that in 3 points. First, the area that it's located in. As the mayor said, Blue Ridge Plantation feels and is certainly on the fringe of the northern boundary of Greer. This is certainly more of an infill project. You have more accessibility to this area. Second point, modeling data is telling us that homes are selling before the foundation's poured. The economy is thriving, and this is one of the reasons why we have success in this area. You will see a little bit of a different model approach here. While we do have a developer for 20 and 21 with a builder already secured, 22 is a builder-developer project, whereas the builder is the developer. They're ready to go. They're ready to roll right now. So we're not seeing the land being developed over time and taken down piece by piece as the builder is prepared to take those. The builder is the purchaser of this property. Therefore, that is very different than what you saw at Blue Ridge Plantation with one developer with a dream for this property and then hoping that he would be able to sell his portions piece by piece to a developer. The third point is that the emphasis in our comprehensive plan is a much higher density in this area than it was for Blue Ridge Plantation, and perhaps in 2004 and earlier, when the economy was moving up, we thought that was the high growth area. Even upstate regional economists told us that Lake Robinson area was the hot spot. We're seeing that more centralized now into Greer. As we've improved our downtown, the trickle down is going to be just astronomical, and this is an evidence of that fact.
Council, we have a motion and a second on ordinance number 20-2018. Any additional comments in that regard? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council will move to the first reading of ordinance number 21-2018. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of a portion of property owned by William and Marsha Johnson located at 1689 Gibshells Road and Ellis Sudeth Nichols located at 122 Nichols Drive by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of DRD for said property. Ordinance 21, as Ms. McCormick has already told us, is an annexation and zoning request for the property located on Gibshells Road in Greenville County. This parcel up for annexation is 10.9 acres. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, just slightly above this project, we have another parcel being added to the portion of this, and as Mr. Burgess pointed out, we will have boundary survey before second reading to quantify that total 10.9 acres. This is a 52-unit townhome development. Currently, it's undeveloped, and again, we do see a new connection potential between this original plan 21 and 20, which will fully connect with 22 as we see here. So parcel in question on this map is this northern piece, and they do show that full connection in this area.
Kelly, we also showed on the other screen
Oh, sure.
as well.
This is that connection. We're accomplishing several goals with these connection points. I failed to make this point in the last presentation. Not only is it creating access for homeowners, it's also allowing our fire and emergency services to have additional points of ingress and egress to this property. We need to think about things like that as we do become more dense, that we meet the fire code but also have good access for emergency services. Glad to share any more details about this property. It's very similar in design to the prior project. However, these are single-family attached or townhouse units, and the number of those is 52.
For the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive ordinance number 21-2018.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, in regards to ordinance 21-2018, Are there any owners or owners' representatives of the property in question with us this evening? Would anyone care to make any comments in regards to ordinance 21-2018? Okay, thank you. Council? Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Aaron Wood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council will move to the first reading of ordinance number 22-2018. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of property owned by and James D. Sudduth and Pamela S. Thompson located at 1749 Gibb Shoals Road and 1670 South Highway 14, and Dennis R. and Pam S. Thompson located at 1755 Gibb Shoals Road by 100% petition, and to establish a zoning classification of DRD for said properties. Ordinance number 22-2018 is an annexation and zoning request for property located on Gibb Shoals Road, Super Road, and Highway 14 in Greenville County. This parcel contains 81.202 acres. The property is proposed for a mixed-use development with a design review district zoning. Ms. McCormick?
Thank you, Mayor Danner. This is our larger parcel and two smaller ones to the south. So, large parcel here, we've got one on the corner, and then a small one here on 14. Two sides of the property. In your original packet, we had a plan mailed out to you, and that's detailed on the screen, but they have revised that plan based on our discussions and on some market analysis that they have completed, so I'll go over those changes with you briefly between the two plans, but I will show the plan that's up for review that they would like to propose for revision this evening. The single-family portion of this development changed from 163 units to 166 units, so that's 3 additional units. The townhome portion changed from 97 units to 196 units, and that seems like a large jump, but they did take out all of the multifamily apartments that were initially located right off of 14 as we go back and look. They were located here. And those are these. And now in their revised plan, they have added another row of single-family and additional townhouse units. You see a 2-color variation because these are 22-foot wide in the pink or red color, and the blue are 26-foot wide units, so those will be a little bit larger. And this is a little bit more commercial on the frontage. Originally you had about 9.5 acres, now we have about 10.5 acres of commercial, and it is arranged slightly differently. The developer, and you can hear from him later if you choose, did market research, and they were trying to locate a grocery tenant, a grocery anchor for that commercial space, as detailed in their original statement of intent. However, after shopping that idea and plan around, it was clearly evident that a grocery anchor was not going to locate on this corner. Therefore, they felt the need to revise their commercial plan in this area and do some shorter strip commercial at the front of the property rather than a larger anchor tenant like on, maybe we may see at the Lowe's Food Shopping Center at the intersection of Suber and Hammond Ridge. Therefore, the revised plan does still have 100,000 square foot of commercial space, 166 single-family residential units divided into 2 sections, one that's slightly more dense than the back section, and you have most ingress and egress points off of Highway 14, which is your main boulevard road. I'll highlight that here, coming in, and then connecting all of this portion. You have another access road off of Super in this area, one for the single family in this area as well as here. A pedestrian connection between the 2 single family areas, which is going to be significantly challenging. However, they do have to traverse a creek. And then a single family entrance for the larger estate size lots off of Sewer in this area. There is no access to Gibb Shoals Road from this development. However, with the connection that they are making with the pedestrian connection through the other development, there will be pedestrian access to Gibb Shoals. Part of this also includes a crosswalk that they would like to plan with Greenville County Schools connecting the back of this development to Woodland Elementary. Of course, if students are assigned to other schools, that may go away. However, as we get further along, if this elementary school is selected for some of these or all of these students, that certainly would be something that we would want to see implemented. You also have several new areas of open space on this new plan that were not shown on the old plan, and as they did afford more residential, that allowed them to add more open space. Less dense residential, more open space. Your overall residential density is 5.13 units per acre, and I'll answer any questions or entertain anything that you'd like to
You
discuss.
said the overall density, what did you say it was?
5.13 units per acre. That does not include the commercial, the 10 acres taken out for the commercial.
Council, for the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive ordinance number 22-2018.
So moved.
Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion.
The 10-foot concrete sidewalk path, that is what you're talking about on the backside of the neighborhood that gives you the connectivity with the school?
That's correct. That's shown in this area. And here. So we'll work with the school district, and this was one point of discussion. We want to make sure those students come to a sidewalk and not walking through the drop-off line, so that may need to be moved up or down depending upon where the school district would prefer that crosswalk to be.
Well, also that, I know we're talking about different projects here, but connecting the project that's directly behind this one too, and I know you said something about them walking across a creek or a wetland there, or whatever that is. I mean, is there some way to get that neighborhood adjoined with this one too, with this plan?
Vehicular access?
No, foot traffic.
Yes. The main connection point here is a fire access road. Typically what we see with that is just grassed over pavers. I think what we've discussed and are talking about is a 10-foot wide, a larger pedestrian connection area in that space. You're going to have the weight of a fire truck supported in some sort of format. It won't be a gated, pathway, but maybe brick pavers, and you will have some pedestrian access there. So full pedestrian connectivity throughout this entire development is what was certainly critical. You'll have no pedestrian or no vehicular connectivity between all of this and this development, simply because you're dealing with Army Corps permits, and that would be a very difficult thing to cross. However, they do show a full pedestrian bridge in that area, so any student in this area should potentially, if allowed by their parents and required, sometimes be able to walk to school if they all came through. There'll be sidewalks fully installed along Gibb Shoals Road. Of course, we do have a piece of property here that's not included in that project, so we'll have to figure out what to do here. But coming through, they should be able to make that crosswalk there through a full pedestrian connectivity plan.
You're saying though that it would require some type of permitting or something to get a dedicated bridge or walking path across that?
Yes.
That here?
They will have to secure permits from the Army Corps of Engineers to even build a pedestrian bridge across that creek. A vehicular bridge across that creek would be potentially unfeasible. I mean, it can be done, but that's significantly different than a pedestrian bridge. And the traffic study will tell us more about what to do with all those egress points on Silver Road.
We found out years ago one pedestrian bridge across the creek down there below where was that?
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Council, floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, in regards to ordinance number 22-2018, are the owners or representative of the owners or developers with us this evening? Anyone care to speak to council? you'll identify yourself, please, sir, for purpose of discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. My name is Paul Harrison. I'm with Blue Water Civil Design, and I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicant, and the property owners are also with us tonight. Just to touch on, I want to, first of all, I want to thank Kelly for working with us over the last weeks, and also meeting with the other developer and Jonathan. We had some good conversation this week, and but just to touch on a couple of things that she said, just to clarify, that access between the two communities would be a more or less a hidden emergency access, meaning we would do paver. It would be a 30 to 40 foot wide area. We would do pavers that would support a fire truck in the event that they ever needed to use that area. But mainly, what it would serve is a pedestrian walkway for this community to potentially come over and be able to access any kind of commercial tenants or stores or whatever we end up having along Highway 14. There will be a pedestrian walkway to be able to access all of that. And as Kelly said, basically the pedestrian walkway across the creek, our biggest constraint there would be with the floodplain, not necessarily with the Army Corps, because we would span any wetlands, and we would also have to span the floodplain too. And the magenta line or the pink line that you see on this plan is basically the limits of the 100-year base flood elevation. So it would be a good span to get across that, but we're definitely looking into that option, because we want this to be a community that's walkable to all pedestrians. We do have, Kelly talked a little bit about price points. We do have 2 different price points for the townhome section, but we also have 3 different price points for the single-family detached section, and providing a 3 mixes of lots being 50-foot wide, 60-foot wide, and 70-foot wide lots. Trying to hit different markets in one community that could potentially be a walkable community to commercial up front along Highway 14, and with access, some major accesses or a major boulevard access back out to Highway 14. We do have a traffic study in hand, but that traffic study referenced the old plan that Kelly put on the screen up front, so we're working diligently to get that revised as quickly as possible, and definitely have that back in their hands for prior to our planning commission meeting on Monday night. One other quick note that I wanted to say was, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, maybe it'll come to me in a minute, but that was the main point that I wanted to say, and I would entertain, we are putting sidewalks all along Gibbs Shoals Road, all along Silver Road, all along Highway 14 as well. We have 2 major amenity centers planned for the community in this area, down along Silver Road, and in this area coming in. And the plan would be to, for a project of this size, you need lots of open space in an amenity center. So with that being said, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
I had a quick question about the commercial space that's up top, and I know that the developer was trying to target a grocery store or something along those lines up front, and just kind of curious as to how I'm pretty confident that those parcels there that are on 14 are going to become a lot more valuable, but I was asking this question kind of like the Amazon effect. Are you starting to see that more, where big box is not interested in making investments in communities like ours, even with this amount of housetops, rooftops that you're adding, and with the range of price points? I mean, it's a pretty significant investment that's being made here with the 3 developments.
I can tell you the biggest problem we had, and any grocer or big tenant like a Lowe's or Publix or whoever it may be, you name them, they have to have access to a red light. And meaning that the access directly into the facility, it's almost a given that they have to have that light. Well, we do have a light at the intersection, but this access is too close to that intersection to warrant another light. So it technically would not have a lighted access, and we went back and forth with different tenants that we have relationships with, and time again, that was the response that we were receiving. So we felt like that's probably very highly unlikely to happen. So what we wanted to present was something that a commercial, these are roughly acre and a half parcels, something that we could bring a tenant in that would be beneficial to our community, to the residents of the community, maybe a small restaurant that people could, instead of having to get in their car and drive to it, they could just walk to it. Because it's very important to us what goes along that frontage, because it affects our marketing and the sale of our houses and the community and the residents behind it. So we will be very picky about potential tenants that come to that area, and we want it to play off. We want them both to play off of each other.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense.
It does. I was just curious. I mean, basically the big box idea got nixed, not because they didn't have interest in being here, it was just because of the red light.
Access.
Gotcha. Others?
I think it's a great appreciate to hear a developer talk about community versus dollars, that they want to see it be a good project. I think that's good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Council Ordinance 22-2018. Comments? Questions? Further discussion? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, first reading of ordinance number 23-2018, an ordinance to provide for the annexation of properties owned by Lola M. Crawford and Jesse R. Wright Sr., Jesse E. Wright Jr., located at 936 South Super Road, 938 South Super Road, and 942 South Super Road by 100% petition, and to establish a zoning classification of RM1 for said property. This ordinance 23-2018 is an annexation and zoning request for property located on Super Road in Greenville County. Ms. McCormick?
Thank you, Mayor Danner. Planning Commission will hear this request on Monday, June 18th. Orient you to the area. This is a 3-parcel project located on Super Road. 2 single-family residences currently on site and a large tract that reaches back. This is across from Lismore Village, adjacent to Lismore Park. Again, there's 2 single-family residences and then a large field next to it. And this is simply a request for RM1, no DRD this time, so nothing else to report at this time.
Entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
Second. Have a motion and a second. Floor is open for discussion. By show of hand, is the owner of the property or a representative of the owner of the property with us this evening?
He's on there.
Do you care to address council? Okay, thank you, sir. Council, floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Well, council, felt it appropriate, if they stayed for all those annexations, they should have at least stayed for part of the budget process. But I don't guess we could have forced them to do that, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't want to spend at least 2.5 hours here discussing the budget. With that, we're going to take a short recess, and that'll give folks opportunity that want to leave before we start to discuss the budget, an opportunity to do that, and for those that will be with us to discuss the budget to attend to whatever they may need to attend to before we get started on the budget.
Are those yours? Are those yours?
That's fine.
It made me nervous just seeing it sitting there.
They're not mine.
All right, folks. Appreciate your indulgence as we took just a little break there and let some of the people filter on out and allow us to get to the business at hand. I looked up and feel like I'm in a congressional hearing. I feel like we got to be proving somebody or something. But that's not our intent tonight, yeah. That's not our intent tonight. This is the first reading of ordinance number 24-2018, which is the City of Greer budget ordinance for the fiscal year 2018-19. It's an ordinance relating to the physical affairs of the City of Greer, South Carolina, making appropriations, therefore levying taxes to provide for an effective date. As you are aware, we have discussed a couple of items relative to the budget, and particularly to doing a two-year budget. We are going to look tonight at 2018 and 19. We will have some discussion about how we may or may not want to move forward with other pieces and parts of that. But for the purpose of discussion, we will focus in on 18 and 19 for items that are at hand. As we took time during our break, I think it became fairly evident that while some of us have had time to look at the budget, there has certainly not been maybe appropriate time for us to dig too deep into the budget ordinance, and by virtue of the fact that we have come to understand that you as staff spend an enormous amount of time working on bringing us a balanced budget, that it allays some of our questions and fears in regards to what we may be faced with here. And so I think tonight's activity will be to take, for lack of a better word, sort of a 30,000-foot view of the budget and allow appropriate time for discussion or questions within that framework, but not to drill too deeply in terms of specifics. And nevertheless, if there is something that you do need more information on, we can certainly discuss that tonight. But also the administrator and or department heads will be glad to give you more information as you have time to further digest the budget over the next 2 weeks. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Driggers.
For a matter of process, do we want to get a motion for discussion, or do you want us to present and then allow for a motion? Either way is fine.
Since there may be questions during the course of that conversation, let's do that. This is the first reading of ordinance number 24-2018 for the purpose of discussion. Do I hear a motion to receive?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Floor is open now. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. What we would like to do this evening, as you have indicated, our staff that have been involved in the preparation of this budget are with us this evening. They're certainly available. They know their departments intimately, and they certainly are able to give us any additional background information that you may need. As we approach this process, one of the things that we are indeed fortunate as a community that through the leadership that this council has provided, we have matured in our process, that we now talk about programmatic issues. We talk about what are those things that are important to us as a community, that we want to make sure that we are allocating resources to those things. We've laughed a bit about it over the years that thank goodness we're no longer at the point that we're counting bullets. But there was a day that we had to do that. There was a day that zero-based budgeting was an absolute essential process for us, and that we scrutinized because we were having to make very, very difficult decisions because there were service demands greater than there were revenues to be able to support those services. But we have very well grown from that position. As was indicated during our financial audits in recent years, our financial position is the strongest that it has ever been in the history of our city. We are at the cusp of doing some significant things in our downtown area and surrounding areas. We have investment being made in parks and recreation and cultural arts, in streetscape, and in resources for equipment, personnel, and the delivery of services. So if I could, I wanted to spend a couple moments just sharing with you some of the highlights of where we are in this process. As you are aware, we not only do we fund our general fund budget, and that's the day-to-day operations, but we also have 10 special funds that we are responsible for as well, and those are included, as the ordinance indicates, those are included as a part of this ordinance in their entirety as well. So we want to make sure that we're providing information on each of those. One of the things that I will call to your attention is that we have you will see two numbers as you work through these documents. A year ago, when we passed the 2017-2018 budget that ends June 30th, 2018, that budget was in the amount of $24,181,819. I will show you in a few moments as we work through that, but because of our accounting rules and adjustments that we make through the audit process, that number gets reflected a bit different in your budget documents as what we call the amended budget. Now, that amended budget, again, isn't anything that you're taking action on. Again, it is financial entries. Now, we get below that explanation, I've got to get accountants and other folks to start explaining why they have to do that, but it is just that, it is that process of us following the accounting rules necessary for transferring from ending a budget, moving into a budget, and doing transfers in that budget throughout the year. So, as we look at this 2018, the one that we're ending right now at $24,181,819, we are proposing a budget to you at $25,965,208. That is a $1,783,389 increase to the prior year budget. That reflects a 7.37% increase, but we are able to accomplish that with the same millage as prior year. 97.8 mills would be the millage necessary for ad valorem taxes to do this budget. One of the things that is important for us to note is that our state legislature controls what you are able to do relative to the millage. They allow us to consider CPI plus growth. Consumer price index for our prior year is 2.13%. Our growth for the past year was 6.6%. So you are allowed statutorily to have a millage increase of up to 8.73% of your budget. Now, we're at 97.8, so just for rounding purposes, that's basically almost about 100 mills, so you can start to see exactly what that percentage increase would be as well. 8.73% increase would have you somewhere about 8.5 mills of tax that would be allowed under the state statute. While that is allowed for us, there's a catch-up provision that's in that statute as well. We've not exercised the catch-up provision, And certainly, we are not proposing or recommending that we use any of that relative to CPI and growth. And a normal community would recognize the need to exercise the right to use their percentage increase under the CPI plus growth scenario. Because that's the imply abnormal, right? That is not what we would want to. We are not the norm in that we are able to sustain our growth in our budget off of increase in tax value to our appreciating properties. And that is not the norm in most communities in South Carolina. And when we look at our comparison cities, some of those have that, are in the same situation that we are. Most are not. And we can certainly look at non-comparison cities, and we could name those if you were to inquire, but there are a large number of our South Carolina cities that growth is zero. And so CPI certainly is all that they have available to them, and they're typically not able to sustain budgetary increases that CPI allows for. So they have to reduce services. I mean, and that literally is what typically happens, or they have a super majority of their council that doesn't override and goes in that fashion. We're very fortunate. That's so I think that was the intent of my comment, is that we are very, very fortunate to be in a situation unlike most. Yes.
How long can we, is the recapture, is it 2 years, 3 years?
3 years. It's a 3-year look back. And so if you don't use this, and next year you were to have some catastrophic issue and you needed to be able to look back, you would have next year's CPI plus growth and a look back to 3 years. So our look back is in similar fashion. Last year was like 1.9, I think, plus growth at that point was about 6.4. But you would probably have a 3-year look back of about, I'm going to say close to 20 to 25%. We would not propose that you would ever need it. It isn't, in everything that we see, in a worst case scenario, you would never need to do that full recapture. That would be going up 20, 25 mills of tax. And we just don't see it.
What is a mill worth now?
It's about 125,000. I'll show you exactly, but I think it's right at about 125,000. Yeah. On the next slide, if I could, and we'll keep you moving on this, certainly what we're intending to reflect here is what is occurring with our budget over time. We're doing a 10-year review of that general fund, so you can see that we do have steady increases and steady growth to that general fund budget. Where we allocate those dollars and where our resources are coming from, there's always inquiry to that, but you can see here on this slide the large blue area are our property taxes. It's a little less than half of our total revenues. 47.12% of our total revenues are coming from ad valorem taxes. Franchises and license are that red area, accounting for about 28, a little less than 28.5%, 28.42%. Interest and other expenses, or other revenue sources rather, are accounting for about 9.22%. And then you can see intergovernmental revenue, fines and forfeitures, permits and fees, and grants make up the rest of a little less than 1/4 of that total budget. So 3/4 coming from franchise, license, and property tax. That other 1/4 coming from the various other revenue sources, amounting for that $25,965,208, which is our proposed number going forward. We provide this slide to show you where we are seeing increases in revenue. You can see property taxes, franchise and license are showing some increases. We're pretty stable, just a couple of dollars short on that interest in other areas. Intergovernmental revenue up a bit, a slight tick up on fines and forfeitures, permits and fees slightly up as well, and grants up. But this slide is to demonstrate where we are seeing that growth, at least on a one-year basis for the budget. But we also want to take that information and take it back out over that 10-year period as well, so that you're seeing what is happening to those revenue sources historically over that 10-year period in each of those areas. Property taxes, franchising fees, interest and other, again, across the board, looking at those. Increase in assessed property values for us and increase in commerce is where we see our largest growth, and that's going to be ad valorem tax and franchising fees. But again, being able to accomplish that without the millage increases that many other communities have to see. So I was pretty close, $125,092, reflecting the value of a mill depending on property values in our various districts around the city. We typically look at about $150,000 home across the city, but you can see the value of a single mill, the cost to our residents at 97.8 from that $50,000 up to that $200,000 mark. We are proposing that we would anticipate receiving $12,234.035 in ad valorem tax at our 97.8 mil ratio. That should generate $125,092 per individual mill that is generated. We have seen that grow over time. And for those of you that have been around for quite some time, that number has changed substantially over the last 15, 20 years as we've been doing this process. In our general fund, we wanted to make sure that we are continuing to demonstrate that there are steady increases to providing the services to our community as we are continuing to grow as a community. But we are very, very proud of the fact that we've been able to do that at a very stable tax rate that we have not seen increases. Now, because we do a 10-year history on this, when you look at this graph next year, that blip back from 2010 to 11 goes away, and it will be a steady line completely across. So this certainly demonstrates that for the past 9 years, there has not been a tax increase relative to ad valorem taxes in the city of Greer. On the expense side, certainly showing the same things relative to the proposed budget, to our current budget. The total budget, you see that uptick there from the blue to the red. You see that we have an increase in value on Greenville ad valorem properties. Greenville autos stays pretty stable, but there is an increase. Spartanburg ad valorem tax on real property, an increase, and staying pretty stable over there on the auto side as well. But seeing increases to property value has been what has continued to fund that growth for us. Again, looking at that over a 10-year period, you can see how whether we're looking at Greenville County, Spartanburg County, autos for either of those counties as well, this graph is reflecting what we have seen as a matter of increased assessed values in those respective areas. This graph is demonstrating what's happened on the business license side from this current fiscal year to our proposed fiscal year 2018-19. We are anticipating growth, and we will talk a bit more specifically about how we reflect that growth. I will make the comment, I'll demonstrate it a little bit later. It is important to note that we absolutely understand that in a high growth pattern, that there is risk that if that growth is to decrease, or if we were to enter into a recessionary period, that we have great risk at that. We recognize it, and we do not project and budget those dollars relative to growth going forward like we used to pre-recession. We will actually designate those dollars and recognize that a bad economy, a recession, a slowdown in growth will have that impact, so we don't count on it. We will accept that so that we then can use that as a roll forward on fund balance either for large projects in the future, and certainly for us to meet your goals of making sure that we have years where we cannot do tax anticipation notes and that type of strategies going forward. When we look at our business license historically over that 10-year period as well, you can certainly see we break those down between our local and that which we receive through the municipal association. The two downward blips that you see back in 2014 and 2017 relative to the revenues of the municipal association, both of those were lawsuit settlement issues. One involving AT&T, the other involving telecommunications. Most of the independent carriers on telecommunications. Those two lawsuit settlements did result in some net decreases over those periods of time. But over time, if we were to put a growth trend line on this, you can obviously see that in both our local business license and that which is collected by the municipal association, that our trend is upward and has been steady over that 10-year period as well. So as when we look at our general fund relative to expenditures, we have discussed before, and we certainly recognize that we are a service provider, and therefore as a service provider, our largest expense is going to be related to the individuals and the salary and benefits of those individuals to provide those services. So we know that personnel cost, operational cost, and debt is where we're going to primarily see our expenditures. We are at 63.16%, and we'll see in just a moment how that compares historically for us as well, because we're always conscious for that number relative to the increase in our budget expenses as well. Again, this is allowing you to see the blue, the red, green, purple, certainly reflecting where those primary expenditures for us programmatically across the city. This graph illustrates that a little bit different, allowing us to compare that from one year to the next. And so as we look at those comparisons on total budget, personnel, operations, debt service, capital, and transfers, this allows you to see that, yes, we do have those increases as a part of that increase to the total budget in this year. Relative to our overall expenditures, this slide particularly demonstrates our programmatic areas, allowing us to see where we spend our dollars for public safety, for police and fire, public services, our roads, bridges, sidewalks, garbage collection, that type of the garbage part of that is not in the fee part of our structure, building and development standards, of course. Administration, the small little sliver there for council, municipal court, general government operations. We monitor all of those on a programmatic use basis, and that's what this next slide allows you to see. So we certainly want to monitor what types of increases that we are experiencing for each of those program areas across the board. This next slide demonstrates how we compare as a percent of the total budget to our personnel cost. We know that those dollars can go up and down. We have a target here that we try for those not to exceed 65%. Last year we were at 64.24% as a percent of total budget. We did see a decrease this year, bringing that back down to 63.16%. So we hear you loud and clear on that issue, and we work very, very hard to make sure that as we consider recommendations, we consider requests from our respective departments, that is a factor in our decision-making process. Those were relative to our general fund. We certainly have our remaining 10 funds are those special funds, and we'll certainly take a look at each of those as well. I'd like to make a couple of comments relative to the general fund about some things that you see kind of generally across the board. I do want to make you aware that we had requests of all departments for 10 new positions in this budget. I am recommending 10 full-time positions and 2 part-time positions. I am recommending to you, and we have funded in this budget 7 full-time positions and 2 part-time positions. We did prepare this budget on a 2-year cycle, and so we asked our department heads to look at over a 2-year period what their request for personnel would be. Those that we were not able to fund in year 1, with the exception of 1, we rolled those over into year 2, and then took their recommendations in year 2 and considered what we would be able to do there as well. So that you are aware of what those involve, we are looking, we had a request, no request for personnel from our fire department in years 1 or 2. They are asking that their resources be allocated more toward evaluating our facilities and our staffing so that we understand better what that may mean for us. But their position was that they didn't feel that it was appropriate to make a recommendation without having that data. And so they've asked for appropriation of resources to get that data, and therefore no staffing requests in year 1 or year 2. In our police department, there was a request for a victim's advocate, an SRO officer, also a uniformed police officer position in year 1. There was a request for a detention officer and a uniformed police officer in year 2. In this budget, I am recommending the SRO and the uniformed police officer in this budget, and I am proposing that the victim's advocate be rolled over to year 2, where we would consider the detention officer and the UPO with that as well. Overall request for 5, we're indicating back to the PD that we think that we would be able to fund 4 of those positions, and coming back to the chief and saying, we need you, that as we would allocate resources, we need you to evaluate those resources and place those in the areas that you best believe serves the department moving forward. So that's how we're trying to approach that. The Public Services Department requested a Public Service Worker 1 in the budget. I am not recommending that position to be funded, and I'm actually not recommending that it roll over into the second year to be funded. And the primary reason for that is that we have a funded position that has been vacant for the entire fiscal year. And I cannot justify adding a position when we have a funded vacant position. Now, there's various reasons for that. There's been some difficulty in getting someone to accept that position. It hasn't been because we haven't tried to do that, but I can't ask for another position when I have a funded vacant position. And so I've just taken that request off the table. But in year 2, there was a request for a Public Service Worker 2 and a custodian position. I am recommending that Public Service Worker 2 in next year's budget as we would move forward. And at this time, not making a recommendation to proceed with the custodian position. In our Recreation Department, they were requesting a cultural arts coordinator. We are putting much more emphasis in our arts programming. We are making an investment at a Center for the Arts. We think that we are well at the position that we need to supplement that as a part of our programmatic recreation services, and so that request was made, and I am proposing that to you in this budget, as well as 2 part-time groundskeeper positions, groundskeeper assistant positions in this budget. In the subsequent budget, in next year's budget, there was a request for moving a part-time recreation coordinator to a full-time position, implementing a grounds maintenance supervisor, and a part-time custodian. Each of those are in my request to you as we begin to ramp up our staffing needs that we will ultimately need for a heavily landscaped downtown area. Our downtown area, when it goes into full installation, we will need additional resources to do that. So in these budgets, we're trying to prepare to do that, but that will be that will be in year 3. Now remember, year 3 for us is 2 years from now. So it's not 3 years from now, it's just our 3rd cycle of the budget. But we're going to need to prepare for that. So those are the recommendations that I'm making to you relative to that request. And building and development standards, The volume of work in that department is mind-boggling. And we've seen the data that's there. All of our departments are busy. All of our departments are processing more and more work through their operations. But what we certainly recognize is that Building and Development Standards Department, they are reactionary to the amount of development that is occurring. They are really our only department that we can truly make staffing adjustments if we see decreases in volume over time, because many of their positions are directly related to the volume of work that's coming through relative to the development that is occurring in our community. There's a recommendation for an administrative assistant to help manage the workflows in that department. I am recommending that to you. And there's also a recommendation for an addition of a stormwater inspector, and I'm recommending that to you, as well as in year 2, a building inspector in that department. In admin, there were requests for a budget and audit manager's position, assistance for an HR coordinator, and assistance for a communications coordinator in those. What I am recommending to you is that we would fund at mid-year the HR coordinator position, so I'm only allocating resources from January through June 30th. We would hold the communications over to the next budget, with that beginning as a half-year process as well. We believe that we certainly have great needs in those areas, and this would allow for us to do that. And the budget and audit manager position, simply because our work volume, the number of transactions and the complexity, because we are now surpassing certain thresholds that more audit processes are required of us, and that's why that recommendation is there. There are 2 important notes. One of those is the SRO officer in the police department that I'm recommending in this year. That is a grant-funded position, and so we will talk in executive session about that grant request, but it is with Spartanburg School District 5 at the Abner Creek School. That position, if we do not accept to enter into an agreement with them, we would not need the position. But if we don't accept, then we don't have the revenue, so it's a wash. That position does not require any general fund appropriation. It is a grant that is funding that. And also the stormwater inspector position under Building and Development Standards. If council chooses that it is not appropriate for us to proceed with the recommendation for an increase on the stormwater fee, that position would be removed. It is directly related to the additional resources needed under the stormwater adjustment from 2160 to 25. That, along with projects, accounts for that. So, again, based on decisions that you'll make ultimate to other parts of the budget, it would certainly have impact to that.
You're going to bring in the budget and audit person first part of the next of this?
This would, I have fully funded that in this fiscal year. Yes, sir.
And what was the second year recommendation for recreation?
For recreation, it was moving a recreation coordinator from part-time to full-time, a grounds maintenance supervisor, and a part-time custodian. And each of those are in, as we would look at year 2, those are appropriated in that budget. In this budget, it's the cultural arts coordinator and 2 part-time, creating 2 part-time groundskeeper assistant positions. Requested 10 and 2, 10 full-time, 2 part-time. I'm recommending the budget 7 full-time and 2 part-time in the 2018-2019 budget. Also reflected in the general fund for this, I wanted to make sure that we were communicating what we are attempting to do for our employees. As we stated earlier, 2.13% is our consumer price index increase for the past year. The budget includes a 2.5% cost of living allowance for our employees. That's done for a couple of reasons. One is that we would like for our compensation scale in a highly competitive upstate market. We want that to move from the lower end especially more in line with what we think the competition would be out there. So getting a little edge on CPI, we think that that is important for us. So the budget does include a 2.5% cost of living allowance, but we are all reminded that that allowance is based on merit and merit first. Every department head has to submit their recommendations for increases for all employees within their departments. We would hope that an employee qualifies for the 2.5%, but if there has been a performance issue with that employee over the past year, if there is an issue that we are monitoring, that full 2.5% would not be granted. It could be anywhere from 0 to any amount under the 2.5 if we have a performance issue that we're monitoring. But our desire is for our employees to be eligible for the 2.5%. And of course, the compensation plan that we have in place that you approved a few years ago, that plan is still in place that deals with the minimum, mid, and max for all of our positions citywide. But again, trying to fund that.
So you got a 2.5 total and what building?
Well, 2.5 is the COLA. The 2.5 is the cost of living allowance. The compensation plan would be as an employee would move in steps through their career. And so we put in place, we adopted that, David, 5 years ago now? 4 years ago. 4 years ago, I think. When we adopted the compensation plan, we built into that plan that employees would have steps, that they're hired and they move through a series of steps over a 30-year career. Those steps are still in place. We've not made any changes to those steps for longevity, but again, those are always based on merit.
So that takes the place of the merit raise? Or that is the merit?
That is the merit. Well, that is the merit. Yeah. Absolutely. That is the merit, and it is only awarded based on merit.
Gotcha.
Yes. This budget does require an additional 1% contribution to the state retirement system, and we will realize that for 2 more years, for 3 more percent, or 3 more years. 3 more years, and so we're having to prepare for that as well, but the budget fully funds that. We do have a situation that the state appropriation does include a 1% return to us on that increase. So we have funded that as a revenue item in the general fund, but we have to also budget for an additional 1% increase for state retirement. And we're doing that across the board. Employees, I believe, there's no additional increases. They've capped at their increase, but our increase continues for another 3 years. But it's fully funded. Relative to our employees as well, we are not proposing any increase to employees for medical insurance. We fully fund medical insurance for full-time employees at 100%. This budget allows us to continue to do that. And we are not proposing an increase in family coverage, dependent coverage under this plan as well. There are some increases in cost because we have more employees. But our budget allows us to absorb those in general operation, and we are not needing to pass that along. So we're still at an 80-20 ratio that we fund 80% of dependent coverage and the employee funds 20% of dependent coverage. And we're asking that we would leave that ratio the same, so no changes to that. There obviously are a number of areas inside the budget on the general fund side. And as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to call to your attention how we are handling, how we handle the growth of ad valorem tax and particularly business license as well. If you are looking at your general fund budgets, that is Fund 11. On the very first page there, we are comparing that recommended budget of $12,234,035. I go back and I look at the actual budget for 2016-17, where we actually finished those audited numbers, where we budgeted for 2017-18, and where we are as of the printing of this document. There is a 6.4% increase in what we believe ad valorem will do from the current budget to our recommended budget. But if you will look at the actual column that is already at $11,849,880, that cuts in half to 3.2%. So while we are budgeting a larger increase, we are very, very confident that the increase in assessed values, that we are not stretching those numbers, because we are already at $11,849,880, and the growth there would be 3.2%. So I just want to point that out of how we're trying to be extremely conservative to how we are calculating those numbers. You will see that also relative to business license, that we come back and we try to make sure that that we are not relying on growth in our business license relative to development, because we know that there's a risk that that development could stop or slow down. So the greatest point to make in that is over on page 2, where we are appropriating, we're budgeting $7,379,376. That is compared to our current budget of $7,030,030, which is only about a $340,000 increase. But we note, if you look at where we finished in the prior year, at $8,281,140. We're taking that risk out of that number, so that if we do have that slowdown in the economy, if we do have a recessionary period, we have two strategies to deal with that. One, we weren't relying on the money for development. We're very intentional about that. And the second is, we have demonstrated in the past that when we have hard economic times, we have strategies in place to deal with that. We know how to go in and make adjustments to our budgets to reflect those types of economic issues when they occur. And so those are accounted for in this as well. The remainder of that budget are line items that are appropriated through it. I am certainly glad to answer any questions. If you've highlighted anything relative to that, we're glad to answer that tonight. We certainly recommend and encourage that you would continue to look through the budget, and if those questions come later, we are certainly glad to answer those at that time as well. But we wanted to deal with it at the high level, programmatically reflecting the change in that budget for the general fund. At that point, are there any questions that you are initially seeing that you would like for us to go to and address this evening?
Council?
Very well.
Good.
We'll keep moving forward. That then takes us from the general fund into our special funds, and I've asked Mr. Seifert and Mr. Sale to assist us with that side of the operation. I will ask that we will go over and let me back up. Because that's the order that they're in. Let's keep it in order. David, we'll go ahead and move straight into contingency fund.
Okay. If you're looking at your budget documents, the title on it will be contingency fund, and the fund number, the first two digits are 08. This contingency fund was created a couple years ago, and as you know, this was used to cover unexpected or emergency expenses that may arise. The funding that you see on page 1 of $47,455 does keep us compliant with our financial policies at 1% of prior year's results of operations. That fund has seen a couple of expenses hit it this year for some repairs and things that we've been, weren't anticipated emergency repairs. But this fund is back up at that 1% level after those expenses. So if you have any questions on the contingency fund.
Recreation Program Fund.
As you tell, this is funding the programs for the Recreation Department. There are fees and expenses associated with all of the programs that the Recreation Department runs. There are two new substantial programs just to bring to your attention. One is on page 3 of 4 under municipal complex events, an additional revenue source of $4,500. And that's predominantly for the food truck rallies, food truck rollouts that we're holding here at City Hall. And then secondly, down at the bottom of that same page, in the line item named vended market, just an additional revenue line item of $1,500. And you'll see the same corresponding expenditures related with those programs through the expenditure section. There's a budgeted overall increase of $10,938, again predominantly from those two new programs that I have just previously covered. Total revenue proposed for the Recreation Programs Fund, $250,700. Any questions on that?
What we typically call lease purchase, but our capital equipment fund, I've asked Mr. Sale to review that.
Triggers, council will refer to the section in the budget documents that we're writing the capital equipment fund. One thing I'd like to point out is I think on the slide above us, it has 24,747 as the fiscal year 2018 capital fund budget. That number is actually, if you look on the budget documents, it's $2,550,354. I apologize for that error on the slide. The FY 2019 capital equipment fund budget is $2,981,310. I'd like to go ahead and just do a quick overview of what's included in that capital fund. As Mr. Greer indicated earlier from a programmatic standpoint, I'm going to start off and do it in reverse. Normally I cover the vehicle fleet information first, but in general, the types of funding that is included in the budget for computer equipment and software that is spread out through many different departments. A lot of this is addressing end-of-life replacement, upgrades for equipment that needs to be replaced, PCs for departments, network equipment. We also have a line item in there for some facilities management software and equipment that is to utilize our training system, which controls our HVAC systems that are in our buildings. Next kind of category is FF&E for parks and fields. A lot of there's some playground updates, there's repairs that are made to different facilities. Some of the areas that that's being targeted for, the Heights Park, Greentown, Century Park, those type of facilities are in some need of some upgrades and some maintenance and some additions. One thing to note is in regard to Victor Gym, there's some other line items covered in the budget for example, for HVAC system inside the gym, for maintenance, some security items in the exterior of the building, new goals to expand, be able to utilize the gym floor space in the facility even more. Those are all included in the budget as well. Also, in relation to new hires also may obviously fleet needs, but it does require some furniture and equipment, desks and things like that. So there are items in different departments where you'll see some FF&E. Those are tied to new hires that are being made in order to provide desk and equipment for them. Also, there's some maintenance equipment needs for parks and fields, either like mowers, things like that that need to be utilized in order for upkeep of our ball fields in our different park areas. There's line items for some Christmas decorations. Those decorations are to address the project that we did on Highway 29 with the addition of the light fixtures on that Wayhampton Boulevard. There are a lot of light poles than there were previously, so we're making sure that we address the need of getting those fixtures up and getting them in place for this upcoming season. And then one other line item note that I've got on here is fire alarms. This is an upgrade for the fire department, replacing and upgrading fire alarm equipment for the PD. In regards to vehicles, department by department, mainly vehicle and fleet needs this year accomplished three major goals. One is to address new hires. As Mr. Greer mentioned, we have a couple new hires. They're related to fire equipment. We also have our standard replacement needs for aging equipment that needs to go out of the system and be replaced. And then we have some requests for some service need issues that we have that we need to address as well. By department, in the fire department, there is a request for a vehicle. This is to replace an existing vehicle in our admin area. This is one of the deputy chief's vehicles. We're going to take that vehicle and repurpose it as a fleet admin training fleet option for the department to meet those needs in order to get folks in a vehicle that can accommodate more than just one or two people. That Durango that will be moving over there is able to actually accommodate multiple individuals, so we can send multiple individuals in a single vehicle to training. And we would repurpose the Ranger that is at our substate at our Station 2, Station 56, and repurpose it into another department if need be. Can't be repurposed, it would be done, so it would go out. They're requesting a fire truck to replace a 20-year-old aging unit to come out of the system. This is information that's been brought to council before in regards to that particular item. It is the big ticket item that is in the capital budget this year. Whenever you add a fire truck to it, it makes that number go up. It represents about $1 million. If you take a look at what our from previous years to this year, without that type of purchase, we are actually about $500,000 less than what we would have budgeted in the previous year. But with the addition of the need to replace that piece of equipment, that is causing our capital improvement, capital equipment fund to show us a $500,000 increase from the previous year. Also, they're asking for a gator. This gator would be in addition to the existing gator they have to help support events. We have many times that we have more crews that are attending events to support it and have transportation getting in and out of crowds is difficult. With the addition of another piece of equipment, they will be able to accomplish that and to address special activities and use it to access smaller, tighter areas with a response equipment where they can't get a regular truck in and out of. Also, in their budget is the equipment to outfit those vehicles as well. In the PD, as always, it is our largest request. There's 11 vehicles being requested in that particular department. It again is a mixture of replacement of existing vehicles and addition of new positions, with the 2 new positions of the SRO and the addition of the new UPO. That will be in addition to the fleet. For those 2, we have a request for an additional animal control truck. The existing animal control truck is getting near end of life, but it still has use. However, we've already into a situation where on weekends and in evenings, there is a need to have that vehicle. That vehicle is with the animal control officer. We can respond as needed. But we also have a need to be able to transport animals in a more immediacy and get them to the kennels that we are constructing, completing over at the old public services center. One other thing that I do want to note, just for council's information in regards to the police department, we are, if council will recall, a couple years ago, we did not, I think we purchased maybe 2 vehicles in the police department and utilized existing vehicles in our fleet. What we ran into in that regard was that now we are faced with a situation where we implemented a policy a couple years ago in assigning vehicles to officers on a more on a sooner basis than we had in the past. Rather than waiting a 2-year period, we're looking at it as in a 1-year period. So there is less fleet vehicles available for us in the fleet. We would be down to about 3 fleet vehicles in the entire fleet, and that is not really sustainable. So we will be keeping a couple of extra vehicles that we would normally send out. And I just wanted to make sure the council was aware of that.
You mean the vehicles you're retiring?
Correct. Yes, there would be government. Normally, we would send, in the case of, we normally take about 6 in each year and send 6 out. We probably are going to have only about 3 go out this time. Of course, we will evaluate it, and if, when we get that gov deal period, if we have equipment that can't go out, we would send it out and it's not being utilized. We don't want vehicles just sitting, not being used.
Yeah, but you need so many backup, right?
Correct. And that's what we're trying to assess. With us missing a year of replacing, getting to the point that we're adding positions, and that we have changed the policy of when, how quickly an officer gets in a vehicle, be able to have a take-home vehicle, that's what's producing the amount that's available for new hires, new trainees that are coming through, waiting to get that sign of that vehicle. We have, for instance, right now we have about 6 open positions. When those come in, once they go through the first 6 months, they start getting out, they start being able to utilize the vehicle, but that vehicle eventually will be assigned to them once they meet the threshold of a year's training, field training. Also in the line item, we have equipment vehicles in the PD that will be outfitted for all the vehicles that are coming in. The other big ticket line item in the capital fund is in public services. Things that I do want to address with council. One is we are getting a new truck. That'll be a 1 in, 1 out. That's just to replace an aging piece of equipment that's in the department. Truck will come in and they'll shuffle some vehicles around, but we'll be sending one. This is a pickup truck out through Gov Deals. It will be retired.
They're getting a new pickup truck?
I'm sorry?
They're getting a new pickup truck?
Yes.
Didn't we just get rid of a pickup truck?
We, in last year's budget, we did get rid of some pickup trucks that, no, last year did not get.
We're talking about the
new fleet vehicles.
Which department is this?
Public services.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, public services. They are also asking for a dump truck. There's a couple needs for this. One is that it will be outfitted for leaf pickup and snow pickup. We had one of our vehicles, an old piece of equipment, was damaged in an accident. We have put that vehicle back in service, but a lot of our equipment in the public service department is aging out and needs to be replaced. That particular dump truck will help support in case we're worried about the life expectancy of that particular vehicle, but we also will be sending a dump truck out of the public service department. However, we are not going to be doing that particular unit. We're going to be sending that unit over to the recreation department. The recreation department utilizes the smallest dump truck in Skipper's fleet at this time to do things for field services, things like bringing field dressing and sod to service the field, and also to move our stage equipment and our stage for events. It is the only dump truck that we have in the fleet that doesn't require a CDL because of the size of the dump truck. It's a small unit. So anyone in the recreation department will be able to drive that truck. So rather than send that truck out this time, knowing that we would have that need, knowing that we would probably have to have some CDL licensing that would need to take place in recreation for them to borrow existing public services equipment, we feel it's in the best interest to move that piece of equipment over to recreation at this time. Also, there's a request for a track code. The track code is different than the back code. Track code uses a track system. We have needs that we're not able to address with that we require that kind of equipment for safety and stability in larger projects. There is with track code, we have to have trailers in order to haul it around, so that is included as well. A new knuckle boom truck is being requested. This is to replace aging equipment. We have a knuckle boom that will be requested this year, and we are going to be requesting a knuckle boom in next year's capital fund budget as well to replace both those units will be retired and sent to Gulfville. We are running into a lot of maintenance issues with those two pieces of equipment at this time, not so much with the engine and transmission, but with the upkeep of the hydraulics and the motor that runs the lift arms and stuff like that. We are spending a lot more maintenance money over time for those pieces of equipment, more so than it's better to go ahead and bring these new equipment now to replace that aging, those aging units. One other item for the public services is a shop lift. This lift is to be brought in. It's a more heavy-duty, larger lift to help be able to allow us to service the larger trucks in our shop. There are some smaller individual needs that we can do in servicing that equipment that we have to send out now. It will be used for all equipment, but it will also, because it's a larger piece, we'll be able to start servicing some of the larger pieces of large vehicles in the other services department. The only other two items are two vehicles. One is for recreation. It is an Escape to replace the Dodge Nitro. This was a repurposed vehicle for the fire department. And then and that will be retired, sent out to Gulfville. And then finally, is a request for a truck, but it's for the stormwater inspector, which is a new position. Those are the items that are contained in the capital equipment fund. I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Council? Thank you, sir.
Very good. We'll continue to move forward with our debt service fund.
Okay, the debt service fund, as stated there, will cover the debt service for the general fund for the city. There's an increase of $197,136 over the prior year. Included in the general fund debt would be our general obligation bonds, our revenue bonds, and our lease purchases. Total budget being proposed, $1,792,080. Any questions on debt service?
The graph on the screen shows the 10-year performance of debt. We've been quite proud of the fact that we were steadily decreasing our debt. We recognized that we needed to take on some additional debt back in 2015. Saw some decreases there for the next couple of years with the increase last year, and of course moving forward. As a percentage of our total operations and our total budget, our debt service is very much in line with what our financial strategies have been, but we wanted to make sure that we were reflecting that we are starting to see that uptick, and that will level off again for us as we stabilize debt, and then over time as we would see general increases to the general fund operational budget. We'll start seeing some debt retired over time, but we remind ourselves that this past year we took on debt, and we will need to begin the process of making those payments back. The important part, I think, of what happens when we look at our historical debt picture is the fact that we have funded any of those debt requirements within our current ability to do that with our current millage rate. We have, again, we go back and look over the last 9 years, no increase in millage, but you can see where we've had increases where necessary for debt, but we're able to fund that completely with our available revenue sources. Hospitality and accommodations.
The hospitality accommodations taxes fund has a total requested budget of $2,240,023. Beginning on the revenue side, there are two items of note. On page 1, you will see a fund balance appropriation of a little over $70,000 right in the middle of the page. That is using fund balance dollars, but this was anticipated as part of our financing plan for the debt that was issued in December for the Center for the Arts projects and the downtown projects. On the second page, the one line there of revenues and hospitality taxes, you'll see an anticipated increase in hospitality taxes of about $123,000. Again, total revenue projected at $2,240,023. Moving to the expenditure side, the first section is covering transfers. Most of these are programmatically are the same as prior years. I'm going to just point out some highlights. The fourth line down is the title transfer to and from the 2017 IPRP. This is the debt service from the hospitality and tax, accommodation taxes fund that is covering the debt that we issued in December. An amount of $501,948 covering that debt service payment. If you look at pages 2 of 4 and 3 of 4, you will see a lot of blank lines in the current year's requested budget. Those are programmatic expenses or items we were covering in the hospitality fund that due to the increase in the debt service, we had to move the coverage of those expenses to other funds. So those are still being taken care of, but they're in other funds such as the general fund or the facilities maintenance fund or the facilities use fund. There are no new programs being, other than the debt we've talked about, being implemented or requested in the fund 18, the hospitality taxes fund.
Must have decided not to do Christmas on the way home.
I don't know, we had decorations, we got them.
It took a hit on here.
It took a hit on
That's one of the expenses that can move to another fund.
Oh, okay.
They're not here, those are the ones, they're not here, they've been moved to other funds.
Okay.
They're still being taken care of.
More poles, more decorations.
Any questions on hospitality and accommodations taxes?
Again, the graph's reflecting our historical review over a 10-year period on this fund. Pretty stable, particularly from 2013 through 2016. Saw a large increase in 17, brought that back down a bit, but now moved back up just above where we were at that 2017 mark. Any questions, we're certainly glad to try to address those. Okay. Stormwater Fund, Mr. Seifert?
Okay, Stormwater Fund is Fund 19. Starting on page 101, which is the revenues. The items of note that are different, at the very top, we have a fund balance appropriation of $316,500. That is a carryover of funds that we've been appropriating for repairs and renovations at the Bumpkin Street recycling facility. Those are just funds being carried forward that are being represented in the budget. And then, as Mr. Greer has explained a little earlier, a fee increase request that is translating to stormwater fees at the bottom page of $910,000 for this one. Moving to the expenses, there are again no program changes. The fee increase covers the new employee and allows for increased stormwater projects and addresses issues during construction. The stormwater projects increase is about $79,000 after all other obligations are met. Any questions on stormwater?
Because there is a proposal for an increase in this fund, I wanted to address a couple of issues relative to it. We'll look at a moment how we continue to compare on our stormwater costs to our comparison group. But the $3.40 increase on an ERU, obviously for the majority of our properties, residential properties throughout the city, that increase would be the $3.40. Again, we don't have that many units, that many properties that are larger than an equivalent residential unit. There are some, but most of our parcels would be seeing that $3.40 increase. This is the first time that we've had an increase proposed in that fund. We've had some discussion about it over the last couple of years. We think, from a staff perspective, we think that it is appropriate that we consider this at this time for a couple of reasons. And very validly. Several folks have asked me concerning the fund balance of our stormwater account. We are scheduled to spend down most of those dollars within the next 12 to 24 months. So over the next 2-year period, we have a number of projects that those dollars will get used in. One of those is the recycling center or the old public services site. We know that we have an expenditure of an excess, I think it's about $341,000 that we will be experiencing there. We have some smaller projects around the city that Mr. Grant has been working on. I think he was making a comment at the staff meeting yesterday that 3 of those projects are kind of hitting all of right here at the same time, trying to get prepared for those projects, and they're proceeding. And so we're glad to see that. And of course, the largest expenditure that we will realize out of that fund over the next 12 to 24 months will be in our downtown area. Much of the work that we're doing relative to our parking lot construction, as well as our streetscape work, those that are qualified parts of that, probably we're anticipating, at least on the preliminary budget numbers we have, to the tune of about $1 million, maybe about $1.1 million would be utilized for that purpose. And so we're going to see a pretty significant depletion of those fund balance dollars in the stormwater fund over the next couple of years. The other issue, as I indicated, 2 issues. The second of those is more relative to the requirements of our stormwater permit. So you will see in the expenditures of the stormwater fund that we are looking at doing more projects. So more residential projects would be incorporated into the increase that we're able to fund with this. And the other is for the stormwater inspector, simply because of the volume of permits that are coming through for stormwater plan review, stormwater permitting, construction, and the inspections required under our MS4 permit that we have in place. So that is the reason for that increase, and we're certainly glad to answer any questions relative to that, but wanted to provide the justification for the recommendation of that.
Do we know what Spartanburg County is?
They do it under millage. They charge 1 mil of tax across the board, and that 1 mil funds their county stormwater plan. So that they do it on a millage. Greenville County does it off of a fee, ERU fee. Gotcha. Again, just showing what has happened with that stormwater fund over time. Obviously, we have seen the increases that we've seen to that fund. Those have been because we have developed more land, more property, and as a site would move from a 100-acre peach orchard that then becomes 100 acres of developed lots, we naturally see an increase in that as a result of development. And that's particularly what we've seen there from that 2015 point going forward. The increase that you see from 2018 to 19 is primarily reflected in the $3.40 adjustment. Okay. Real property fund?
This is fund number 23. Looking at the revenue, we have a revenue item from Greenville County taxes of a little over $110,000. This is the result of the 4 mil tax to Greenville County tax for recreation properties. This is the portion that they return to the city of Greer. These funds are currently not designated for the projects, but they're being held in the real property fund solely for some recreation purpose to be determined. At the bottom of page 1 of 3, there are 2 grants. We have a CARD grant and a land water conservation grant that's being requested and awarded through the recreation department. And I'll explain what those are for on the expense side. On page 2 of 3, we have again another fund balance appropriation that's going to be combined with the grant dollars from recreation to cover renovation projects that she has requested. We Those $93,000 are savings from a current project in the real property fund. So we're using those dollars, rolling them over to new projects, so the general fund does not need to transfer any new dollars to the real property fund to help cover these projects. So the $93,784 coming from a fund balance are savings from the current kennel project that is about to wrap up. So no new dollars being transferred from the general fund into the real property fund. For the renovation projects for the recreation department, that's on page 2 of 3 on the expenditure side, $181,000. Those are for renovations to the Victor restrooms, Turner restroom, and Turner parking lot. And then the other dollars that are being requested to be expended through the real property fund have no changes. Again, the transfer to fund balance, $110,000, is the equivalent dollars coming in from Springfield County taxes that are being held to be recognized later. Any questions on the property?
When we look at that fund historically, there's no rhyme or reason, because it is typically and can be a holding account. There are certainly certain expenditures that we would appropriate to this budget, but it's also it's a repository for projects that we sell a piece of property, the proceeds of that property is going to go to that fund, and we don't always know where that's going to occur. And so we'll just have transfers in and transfers out. Sometimes that doesn't have a lot of rhyme or reason, but we have to record them in an appropriate fund. The real property fund is that place. Okay. And the sanitation services fund.
Sanitation services is fund number 33. We'll start with expenditures on this one, and we'll wrap up with the revenues and comments from Mr. Greer. Beginning on the second page, which is the expenditures, the first line item with dollars there allocated are $1,035,000. Those are reflective of our new contract with ACE. The next two line items are showing increases. They're just standard increases in operations for landfill fees and green parks. And then, as part of our contract, we were beginning a pilot program for a new recycling program, and we had dollars allocated there to go to purchase the new recycling containers, and dollars there a little over $81,000. So total requested budget in the sanitation services fund, $1,281,175. Those are being funded by revenues. We have Greer County fees of $900,000 budgeted, Swarmer County fees a little over $331,000, and then cart fees from development of $50,000. That's the revenue being requested for the sanitation services fund.
As an enterprise fund, our objective is to the best of our ability, keep that as neutral as possible. That the fee would generate those dollars necessary to make the payments for those services and the associated cost of providing those services. As a standalone, and I think this one of the questions that I've received from one of you prior to the meeting is, can't we absorb a $6 increase? My perspective is it's not a matter of whether we can absorb a $6 increase, because what that $6 signifies, what it equates to in year one, and that was from 2017 to 18, is going to be a payment of about $55,000 to $60,000 for that 50 cents per month increase for 10,000 plus residential customers. A $60,000 increase isn't a budget breaker, but in year two, that's $120,000. In year three, that's $180,000 to $350,000 over a 5-year period. The concern that I have is that it's not 60, it's 350. And are we in a situation that we are going to subsidize that service through the general fund. And if we choose to subsidize, that's fine. That's a policy decision that council will make. But I want to, in full disclosure, to make sure that we understand if we decide to do that in year 1, then in year 5, that cumulative cost is $350,000. And I think that's what's important about that. And so I anticipate, because we've approved a contract with a 50 cent per month increase, that 50 cents per month is spread across our entire population base. That 50 cents per month is best recaptured on an annual basis than it is to anticipate a $350,000 expense in year 5. That's my position, and that's my recommendation to council to consider. One of the things that I would like for council to consider is that if we acknowledge, and if this is your path forward, in your comprehensive fee schedule, it may be most appropriate that we go ahead and identify that we are anticipating that $6 increase over that period of time, and we go ahead and we identify that in our schedule for 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22 throughout the contract period that we have with ACE Environmental. It's not required by any means, but it certainly acknowledges and demonstrates how we intend to handle that over that period of time, if that is your choice. But in the budget, we are recommending a 50 cents per month increase that will be passed along to our residential customers, taking us from $115 to $121, a $6 increase in that first fiscal year, as we would reflect it in the budget. As we kind of look at that fee over the last few years, because we don't have a long history with that fee, we are seeing increases, or have seen increases from 17 to 18 to 19. The increase in fees from 17 to 18 were primarily growth, number of new residents that's coming on board, and being able to manage it from that perspective. As we do make the change from 2018 to 19, we do have some of that natural growth, more customers that are paying the fee at the $115 basis. So every new house that comes on board, we're now collecting that. But the differential between that amount and that which is proposed in the budget of the $1,281,175 is the $6 increase as well. So I wanted to fully disclose how that was being reviewed. Any questions on that? And our last is our facilities use fund. I'm sorry. In the page fund, yes.
No wonder it was balanced.
Oops, one more.
Facilities use fund, we have revenues projected of $263,938. That includes a $49,000 fund balance appropriation, but those are dollars, for the most part, that we already have on hand that are dedicated for specific expenditures that are on the expenditure side. Just highlighting the main changes, the facilities use fund does not change greatly from year to year unless we have specific projects we're needing to accomplish. Some of those that we need to do in this next budget year. So on page 103 on the expenditures, building repairs to both City Hall and Cannon Center are seeing significant dollars being spent in those facilities. They are upkeep, maintenance, and replacement items that are in both facilities. And then the next two line items for computer maintenance for City Hall and Cannon Center. Mr. Sewell mentioned a training contract for replacement for their monitoring equipment and control equipment. This included at least purchase. Those are for facilities at the PD and the court. We also have the same replacement of that system that is occurring here at City Hall and Cannon Center. So those are what's reflected in the increases for the computer maintenance line items. of replacing their sensors and control equipment with the HVAC that is now coming into the life of the train. All the other programmatic expenses are relatively unchanged. Again, total budget being requested $263,938. Questions on facilities? The last one is the paving fund, fund number 60. Coming out of the retreat that we held a couple weeks ago, it was Mr. Grant brought to us some concerns for our road paving program, and council heard that, and we heard that. So you will see on page 101 the revenue for the paving fund, the very first line item transferred from the general fund. An increase from $250,000 to $400,000 dollars being transferred into the fund from the general fund to help address some of these paving needs. On the second page, you'll see also that same reflection on the expenditure side. Street paving is a new line item in prior fiscal years. You'll see that it is blank. But there's $296,000 being allocated that is specifically for and from the general fund for the city of Greer streets. There are matching dollars still for the Greenville County match, and dollars appropriated for matches with Spartanburg County. All of these added together are about $600,000. The total expected dollars that we need to get to the full 5 miles of road paving over a 25-year life that Mr. Grant was speaking to us about during the retreat is that this budget needs to get to be about $1 million per year, starting to ramp that up over the next several years. So we're at $600,000 being requested for fiscal year 19. So it'll be the same thing for fiscal 20. But then after that, we'll start to see some of these dollars ramping up. So the one street paving line item of $296,000 to reach that full potential of $1 million in this fund needs to be about $600,000. Again, continuing to ramp up over the next several years to get to that point. Any questions on paving fund?
You've made a steady commitment to paving as we set up a restricted account called the paving fund back in 2016. We've made an additional appropriation the following year, help it pretty stable as we moved over to the next year, and then again allocating an additional $250,000 for paving. I think we've heard council loud and clear over the years, and one of the things that you said is that if you're trying to get somewhere, you got to start somewhere, and so we believe that. We absolutely concur with that perspective. And while we may not be able to get there in 1 year, we certainly anticipate that we can get there over the next 3 to 4 years to get to the level that's being recommended. And I think Mr. Grant would agree that moving in that direction is what we need to do. Very good. Questions? In our remaining time, if we could, we want to share with you, Michelle will share with you some of the comparison information relative to some of the changes that we are requesting of you in this budget. Mike?
Thank you, Mr. Greer. While we were putting together the budget, especially in relation to the fee requests that are being made to the Stormwater Fund and Sanitation Fund, one of the questions we asked is how does that affect us in comparison with other municipalities? The information that you see on the first slide is the same information that was presented to you during the council retreat. At that time, we were looking at the comparison between what occurred in fiscal year 2017 and the fiscal year that we're in now, which is 2018. And that comparison remains the same in the next few slides, except for the changes that are being proposed in our budget. In other words, if these changes had been in effect in the FY 2018 budget, where would that position us in comparison with the other municipalities? We just thought this would be information the council would like to have, or like to see, and I just wanted to briefly review that. On the first slide, this is in regards to the sanitation fund and the fees that are in place in our comparison chart. If the requested $121 fee was in place, our position would have been increased in one spot. We would have moved above Somerville in our comparison. So the change wasn't that great, but it would put us another spot up in our comparison. Still puts us in the middle of the pack, where we've been positioned for quite a while, for the past 3 years, with the $115 fee. Next slide. The next slide is in regards to the stormwater fee. This is a fee that we noted that during the retreat, that in the cities that we compare with, of course there are 3 cities that do not have a stormwater fee in place, but of those that do, we were at the bottom of that, in that fee structure, at our current fee rate. With the implementation, if council does choose to implement the fee, our position would remain unchanged. We still would be the lowest among the municipalities that we compare against. Next highest being the $25.65 that you see in Simpsonville Mall. As we have noted in the past, for those 2 particular fees, or those 2 particular municipalities, those are the county fees. $25.65 is what the county implements Simpsonville and Malden, this county program. But those residents do pay that fee, just like our residents pay a fee, but they pay it to the city for the city manage that program. But our position would remain unchanged if that fee were in place in the current budget. Of course, this doesn't take it, just keep in mind, obviously, budgets are being passed through all these municipalities now, and our position and the position of these municipalities could change once we get to this point next year, when we get to the point of about the situation in February, March, council at the retreat next year.
Of course, the only way we would not be the lowest is someone else would have to reduce theirs or eliminate theirs, and that's not likely.
That ain't happening.
This is just a combination of all those fees combined. We always present the total annual fees that are implemented by us in comparison to our comparison municipalities. We would go from $136.60 to $146. If that had been in effect in this current budget year, we would have moved up 2 spots. So that would have moved us ahead of Florence and Spartanburg in regards to where the total annual fees would be positioned. Next slide. On this next one, as council is aware, we always compare the annual property tax and fees combined together on a $100,000 home. That number does increase. We go from $527.80. We would go to $537.20. $10 increase. Excuse me, not quite a $10 increase. $960. Thank you. And but our position remains unchanged. We would still be positioned where we are currently in regards to our comparisons with the other municipalities. This is the same chart, but it's on the median house value. The median house value that we have that we gather information on for the comparison municipalities. Again, we go from $763.43 to $770.83. Again, our position remains unchanged. Next slide. The next slide, the last slide, this is the comparison that we make every year of the percent of median household income that's required to pay the property taxes and fees. We would go from 1.25% of that income being required to 1.54. Again, though, this would our position in comparison would remain unchanged. Again, this is just some information that we thought the council might want to have as they consider the recommendations that are in place. Any questions? Go ahead.
Mayor and Council, that is our presentation for this evening. Again, we want to make sure that if there are any questions relative to any line item, any of the 11 budgets, that we are able to answer those questions for you. We are obviously requesting first reading approval of the budget this evening. Whatever action council takes this evening certainly sets the place for us as we would move forward to the public hearing and second reading. We're prepared, that is being advertised, and we'll move forward with that. Of course, if we can adopt the budget by June 26th, we're good to go because it's effective July 1st. If for any reason that we believe that we cannot do that by June 26th, then we would have prepared for us a continuing resolution, which we would be required to do by law, so that we continue to operate the city. We don't want to have a city shutdown between the 26th or June 30th and your first meeting in July. So we would have to have a continuing resolution. We certainly think that that is doable. We know that if there is a need for, if you desire additional information or a workshop environment, then we're certainly prepared to provide that for you in the coming week. And we can look at that availability for you, however you would choose for us to do that. But that's how we would propose that we would move forward. Again, we have invited all of our department heads and many of our staff members that were involved in preparing these documents for us or with you. If you have questions specific to them or their operations, they are glad to provide that information to you. But we are at that point of saying, how would you like for us to proceed?
Council? Floor is open for discussion. We've got a motion and a second in that regard. Any additional information that you may want at this point in time? Any comments or discussion that you feel is appropriate where we stand? A show of hand, are there any department heads here this evening? So raise your hand. Anyone care to discuss the budget this evening? Would you like to add anything? It's just speak now or forever hold your peace kind of thing. So, I mean, you know, you're all on board. That's good.
Mayor, I will say to our department's credit, typically recommended by the departments, what they've requested, and then what I'll come in and recommend to you. We have traditionally seen some pretty large variances in that. This year it was much more manageable. I think $377,000 is about what we had to take out of what was requested. And in a $26 million budget, $377,000, that was not an extremely difficult task. But it's $377,000 of things that they wanted to do. Things that they felt would give value back to our community, but our commitment was to have an ad valorem neutral budget with no increase to ad valorem taxes, and we were able to fulfill doing that. We went back to our department heads and said, here are the recommended cuts that we're going to be making to give us that balanced budget, and everyone came back to us and said, we will make adjustments and we will move to accommodate for that balanced budget. So
It's that old story about they all put in the puppet wagon to give you something to cut.
Well, I would hope perhaps. But I was extremely proud of our folks in recognizing, again, I said this in my opening statement, we have matured through this process over the years. And I think that there was a day that there was a wish list. Those things that folks would say, the sky is the limit, I'll ask for this, and we'll see what happens. And if they say no, maybe they give me half or a fourth or whatever. I think those days are gone. I really do believe that our department heads, through their communications with their staff and their departments, that they are coming back and they are looking at your priorities. They're looking at the things that you have identified through your comprehensive plan, through your community master plan, through your strategic plan, that you, and your planning process, your annual planning process, that you have said, this is important, we think this is what we do. A prime example was adding $250,000 to road paving. Had we not done that, $377,000 that we cut from the budget would have been a fraction of that. And so we moved those dollars to where you designated that they were a priority, and we took things out from other areas. So I really do believe that there has been a substantial maturing process for us over the years in this, both from council's leadership and how you wanted this to play out, and what we've been able to prepare and deliver back to you. So we feel really good about that.
And let me say on behalf of council to you and to our department heads, we really do appreciate it. I think Ed's use of the word maturing is just spot on, because we've got enough people in this room that have grown together through this process that we truly do understand what we're trying to accomplish in our comprehensive planning and in our retreat planning and everything that we do. I think we are transparent with you as staff as to what we are trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish it. And so when we spend long evenings behind this table and talk about issues with the budget or talk about the budget, and we may appear to be glazed over at some points in time or whatever it may be, please don't ever take away that we aren't very, very appreciative of what y'all do to make this happen. We realize it doesn't just come together. And, we were talking at the announcement the other day about Freedom Blast, and I made the comment that is a year-round planning exercise. We start planning the day after that event's over, and I realize that y'all do that with your budgets every year, and we do appreciate that, that you know how the process works. You are intentional and passionate about what you propose, and we realize that every dollar you propose is something that you truly believe in, or you wouldn't have put it in there. And so as we go through this exercise, I just want to thank you for all the work that you do that makes our job easier and makes this city operate and run like it does, and to have the kind of vision and financial security that we do. As we talked just a minute ago, there are numerous communities around this state that are struggling right now just to figure out how they're going to make it through next year, not what they're going to do extra. And so we're fortunate in that regard, but we're fortunate to have people like each one of you that supports what we want to do and plans how you're going to do that to the best of your ability through a budget process. So from us, thank you for what you do. We really do appreciate it. Council, any other thoughts? Have a motion and a second in regards to the first reading of ordinance number 24-2018. Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Arrowood?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Ms. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Dumas?
Yes.
Mr. Pettis?
Yes.
Mayor Danner?
Yes. Council, we have a couple of items to consider in executive session this evening. I will entertain motions in regards to going into executive session to discuss two matters, one a contractual matter and the other a contractual matter. Matter A, if somebody would like to bring that to us in the form of a motion, please, sir, or ma'am.
Hang on just a second.
Or not. Motion may go. Or not.
All right, Mr. Mayor.
We shut ours down.
I'd like to make a motion for council to enter into executive session to discuss a contractual matter regarding Spartanburg County District 5 SRO School Resource Officer services as allowed by State Statute 30-4-70A2.
Motion before council, do I hear a second?
Second.
Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. And another item before us this evening?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion for council to enter into executive session to discuss a contractual matter regarding Reedville Fire District as allowed by state statute 30-4-70A2.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes.
One.
Council, in executive session, we have considered two contractual matters. The first contractual matter was a motion to go into executive session to discuss a contractual matter regarding the Spartanburg District 5 SRO officer. In regards to that matter, is there any action that needs to be taken?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to
We
make...
got to come out.
Oh, we got to come out of executive session first.
Oh, that helped, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Have a motion to come out of executive session?
So moved.
We'll consider one of those a second.
Yeah.
Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis, Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, in executive session, we have considered a motion for council to enter into executive session to discuss a contractual matter regarding the Spartanburg District 5 SRO officer. Council, do we need to take any action in that regard?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we allow our police chief or our city administrator to enter into a contractual agreement with Spartanburg District 5 to staff a school resource officer.
Have a motion, do I hear a second?
Second.
Have a second in that regard. Any additional information needed? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, we considered a second contractual matter, which was a motion for council to enter into executive session to discuss a contractual matter regarding the Reedville Fire District. Do we need to take any action in that regard?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion that we authorize the city administrator or the mayor to enter into an automatic aid agreement with the Reedville Fire District.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion in that regard?
Well, I don't think it's automatic aid, is it?
We need to enter into a service agreement.
Service.
Okay. Do I need to amend my motion?
Let's amend the motion.
And I'll
Yes.
amend my second.
Okay.
So we've amended the motion to enter into a service agreement, and the motion second has been amended as well to reflect that.
Thank you.
Have a motion and a second with an amended agreement to enter into a service agreement with the Reedville Fire District. Any further discussion in that regard? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Ms. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Dumas,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council, we're adjourned.